My parents secretly gutted my first tech startup, stealing my entire client list to hand to my golden child sister while I was evicted and forced to start over from absolute zero. 8 years later, when my new cybersecurity empire was acquired for $850 million, my mother demanded my presence at a family dinner, so I showed up with the secret corporate acquisition papers, proving I now owned my sister's company, and I finally exposed the sickening financial secret my father had been hiding from all of them. I was 24 years old when I started my first company. It was a boutique cybersecurity and IT consulting firm operating out of a miserable, 150 square foot closet located directly above a high-volume auto body shop on Elm Street. The floor literally vibrated. Vibrated every time the mechanics downstairs ran their industrial air compressors, and my tiny office constantly smelled of toxic paint thinner, Bondo, and burning rubber. I could not afford a real desk. I had exactly $400 to my name after paying the first month's rent. So, I went to a local discount hardware store, bought a hollow-core wooden door for $30, and laid it horizontally across 2 dented, second-hand metal filing cabinets. That was my executive workspace. My primary server rack was shoved unceremoniously into a dark utility closet right next to a heavily leaking water heater. I had to physically check the floor twice a day with a flashlight to make sure the pooling water hadn't crept close enough to short out my entire infrastructure. My very first legitimate contract was with a company called Miller & Sons Logistics. They agreed to pay me $900 a month for continuous network monitoring, threat detection, and quarterly security audits. I didn't even have a functioning printer on the day I officially signed them. The cheap inkjet I had bought at a thrift store had jammed permanently on a piece of cardstock. Because of that, I had to fill out their comprehensive, 5-page client intake form completely by hand. My messy, hurried handwriting covered every single blank line on that document. While the blue ink was still drying on the final page, I mindlessly set my morning coffee mug down on the back of the paper. When I lifted it a few minutes later, it left a distinct, faded brown ring. I didn't care. That physical, stained piece of paper was my holy grail. It was undeniable, tangible proof that I had created something real. Within 7 grueling months of relentless hustle, I had successfully secured 14 loyal clients, pulling in a combined total of roughly $16,000 a month in recurring revenue. It wasn't Silicon Valley billionaire money, but it was mine. I had built it from thousands of agonizing cold calls, offering free network audits, and showing up at suburban business parks with nothing but a cheap laptop and a sales pitch I had obsessively rewritten 50 times. The office still smelled heavily of burning tires, and the ceiling tiles had ugly yellow water stains that seemed to change shape whenever it rained. But my company was steadily growing. Then, my parents decided it was time to get involved in my success. My father, Arthur, invited me over to their house for a Sunday afternoon dinner in late October. He sat me down at his expensive mahogany dining table and bluntly informed me that my older sister, Chloe, desperately needed a job. Chloe had recently earned her MBA from a mid-tier state university, but she possessed a resume that looked significantly better on expensive paper than it ever actually performed in live interviews. She had been completely unemployed for 6 agonizing months, and the financial strain was apparently becoming an embarrassment to the family image. My father framed his sudden intrusion into my business as a purely logical, practical suggestion. "She is your older sister, Julian," Arthur said, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. "She has the formal business degree. You only have the technical computer skills. Bring her into your office, put her on the payroll, let her handle the entire client-facing side of the operation, the scheduling, the invoicing, the daily communication, the marketing. You can just sit in the back and focus on what you are actually good at. She will cover all of your professional blind spots." My mother, Martha, nodded enthusiastically from the kitchen island, wiping down the granite countertops with a rag. She looked at me with an expression that clearly communicated this decision had already been extensively debated and finalized between the two of them long before I even walked through the front door. I looked over at Chloe and asked if she was genuinely interested in the grueling reality of startup work. She offered a practiced, corporate smile and said, "I really think I could bring a lot to the table, Julian." I foolishly thought she meant she would bring a strong work ethic to the table. I didn't realize she meant she was going to take my clients from the table. Chloe officially started working in my office on a rainy Monday morning. For the first 2 weeks, she was a model professional. She answered the phones promptly, completely reorganized my chaotic physical filing system, and set up a highly efficient shared digital calendar for all of our upcoming client security audits. I was genuinely relieved. I thought my father had actually been right, but on her 3rd Friday, I had to leave the office early at 1:00 p.m. to run a comprehensive, on-site vulnerability scan for a massive new prospect across town. When I finally returned to the auto shop office the following Monday morning, I immediately noticed something strange. Sitting innocently in the output tray of our newly purchased laser printer was a massive stack of warm paper. Chloe had systematically printed out my entire master client database spreadsheet. Every single contact name, every contract term, every billing cycle, every upcoming renewal date, every private email address, and every direct cell phone number. She had meticulously printed it, taken the primary copy home with her over the weekend, and the massive stack of paper she had carelessly forgotten in the tray was merely the duplicate copy. She didn't even attempt to hide what she had done. When I nervously confronted her about it, I desperately told myself she was just being incredibly thorough. I forced myself to believe she simply needed the raw information to properly execute her administrative duties. I was 24 years old, and I was still hopelessly naive enough to believe that family members who worked inside your office were actually working for you, not actively studying your infrastructure so they could dismantle you. Exactly 3 weeks later, the execution was carried out with ruthless precision. While I was 5 hours away attending a college fraternity brother's wedding over a long Saturday and Sunday, my father, Arthur, personally called all 14 of my active clients. He aggressively leveraged his name, his vast wealth, and his pristine 3-5-year reputation as a prominent local commercial real estate broker to lend absolute authority to his lies. He confidently told each and every one of my clients that Julian's firm was currently undergoing a massive internal restructuring phase and that a brand new, significantly more robust corporate entity, Apex Digital Solutions, would be permanently handling their accounts going forward to ensure zero lapse in security coverage. He methodically called them one by one, destroying my livelihood while I was standing in a tuxedo sipping champagne at a wedding reception. By the time I returned to the office on Monday morning, my business phone had completely stopped ringing. It was absolute, deafening silence. By Wednesday afternoon, 4 of my most lucrative clients had sent me formal, legally binding termination emails citing shifting operational needs. By the very end of that month, every single one of my 14 clients had successfully transferred their lucrative contracts to Apex Digital Solutions. And who was the registered founder and CEO of Apex Digital? My sister, Chloe. Furthermore, I soon discovered that my mother, Martha, had personally handled all the initial bookkeeping, legally setting up the accounting software and LLC paperwork for Chloe's new company weeks before my father ever even made those devastating phone calls. I drove straight to my parents' sprawling suburban house and furiously confronted my father at the exact same mahogany dining table where he had originally pitched me on the brilliant idea of hiring Chloe. He stood casually by the kitchen counter, his arms crossed over his chest, completely unbothered by my rage. He looked me dead in the eyes and said it directly to my face. "You are running a pathetic toy business out of a dirty closet above a mechanic's garage, Julian. And you actually think you are a real entrepreneur? Your sister has an MBA from a real university. She has the industry relationships. She has the professional presentation. You have a desk made out of a literal door and a broken printer, and you have 14 clients who couldn't even tell the difference between a router and a modem. Give her the rest of the operational list, Julian. She will do significantly more with those assets than you ever could in a lifetime." He delivered this speech like he was patiently explaining the concept of gravity to a toddler. He spoke as if it was completely obvious. He acted as if a 2-4-year-old kid who had built a profitable company from absolutely nothing, with zero outside investors and zero family money, should fall to his knees and be profoundly grateful that his older sister was generous enough to steal what he had bled to create. I did not give him the rest of the list. But it didn't matter, because he had already taken everything of value. The entire confrontation was just a hollow formality. The theft was completely finished long before I ever walked into that kitchen. My startup completely collapsed within 90 days. I simply could not aggressively cold call and replace 14 lost clients fast enough to cover my commercial lease obligations. The gruff auto body shop landlord unapologetically handed me a formal 30-day eviction notice the moment I fell behind on my second consecutive rent payment. I spent those agonizing final 30 days sitting utterly alone in an empty office that felt exactly like a freshly processed crime scene. I made hundreds of desperate cold calls from a brand new list I had painstakingly rebuilt from scratch, pitching my services to annoyed strangers while the office phone on my door desk, the exact same phone that used to ring 10 times a day with incoming business, sat there silently collecting a thick layer of dust. I managed to close 2 new prospects, but neither of them signed the final contracts before the strict eviction deadline hit. I packed my heavily dented sedan on a freezing Saturday morning. The office was already mostly empty because the vast majority of my networking equipment had been leased, and I was forced to return it all to avoid massive financial penalties. I took my personal laptop, a heavy cardboard box full of tangled Ethernet cables, and the 3 cheap, ill-fitting suits I kept hanging in the utility closet for emergency client meetings. I checked the gray filing cabinet one last time. The original Miller & Sons intake form was entirely gone. Chloe had ruthlessly taken it along with the rest of the physical client files, and it was currently sitting safely inside a locked cabinet in a company that carried her name, generating revenue on the exact foundation I had built with my own hands. I locked the flimsy office door, handed the brass key to the mechanic downstairs, and drove 5 hours to a sprawling, unfamiliar city where I didn't know a single human being. Staying in my hometown, where my father's influential name was constantly on the lips of every single client I had just lost, was not a psychological reality I could survive. I absolutely should have permanently cut them off right then and there. I know that now. But I was 24, completely broke, financially ruined, and starting over from absolute zero. The blinding anger had not yet settled into cold, actionable clarity. It was still just raw, suffocating pain. And raw pain does not give you a strategic business plan. It only gives you an overwhelming desire for distance. So I took the distance, and I waited in silence, without truly knowing what I was waiting for, until the perfect plan eventually arrived on its own. I started my life over. I swallowed my pride and accepted a grueling, entry-level contract job at a massive managed services provider, MSP. I was doing basic overnight network monitoring for a pathetic $14 an hour, which was humiliatingly less than some of my former clients had been paying me per hour as an independent consultant. I aggressively saved every single penny for 11 straight months. I lived in a freezing, 300 square foot studio apartment where the ancient iron radiator clanked violently every 20 minutes, and my single, drafty window faced a depressing concrete parking garage. I survived on instant ramen noodles and cheap black coffee. Then, I legally registered a brand new corporate entity, Sentinel Cyber Defense. I immediately began cold calling again, operating out of my tiny apartment. My new desk was a flimsy plastic folding table positioned at the foot of my mattress. My sales pitch had been rewritten and rehearsed so many thousands of times that the opening line felt like involuntary muscle memory. The first year of the rebuild, I signed exactly 5 clients. The second year, the momentum shifted. I signed 12 more massive accounts and finally hired my first official employee, a brilliant part-time malware analyst who worked remotely from his own messy apartment. By year 3, I had secured a massive commercial office space in the downtown financial district, managed a dedicated team of 8 elite engineers, and aggressively negotiated a multi-year contract with a massive regional hospital system that literally tripled my annual revenue overnight. By year 5, Sentinel Cyber Defense had secured highly classified government contracts, built a state-of-the-art 24/7 Security Operations Center, SOC, in a glass building with my company logo illuminated on the exterior, and boasted a fiercely loyal client base that stretched across 14 different states. By year 8, a massive, publicly traded national technology conglomerate made a highly aggressive corporate acquisition offer. At that exact moment, I had 110 full-time employees, active operations spanning across the entire country, and annual gross revenue numbers that would have taken my arrogant father 3 entire lifetimes to match. The intense corporate acquisition officially closed for a staggering $850 million. My personal equity stake, after accounting for 8 years of intentional dilution across multiple venture capital funding rounds, came out to a liquid cash payout of $65 million. The massive financial headline ran that very evening on 3 major business news outlets, and a prominent cable news segment prominently displayed my professional company headshot right beside the staggering $850 million acquisition price, written in bold white text across a bright blue banner. By 9:00 p.m. that night, my personal cell phone was completely melting down with unread messages from people I had not spoken to in nearly a decade. College fraternity brothers, former miserable co-workers from the managed services provider, a random hardware vendor I had casually used in year 2. All of them were incredibly warm, all of them seemingly genuine. And then, perfectly sandwiched between a glowing congratulations text from my very first remote analyst and an automated LinkedIn connection notification I didn't care about, was a text message from my mother, Martha. Family dinner on Sunday. No excuses. Not a single word of congratulations. Not a brief "I am proud of you." Not even a polite question mark or a gentle invitation. It was a cold, direct instruction, delivered in the exact same flat, declarative, authoritative tone she had confidently used when she ordered me to let Chloe into my office 8 long years ago. I read the glowing text message twice, felt a cold knot form in my stomach, and slowly set the phone face down on my expensive mahogany nightstand. I had not stepped foot inside their suburban house in 8 years. I had not spoken a single syllable to my father, Arthur, since that explosive confrontation by the kitchen island. I had not spoken to my mother since a brief, agonizing phone call in year 2 of my brutal rebuild, when she casually asked if I was still throwing a tantrum about the business thing. I had calmly told her I wasn't upset, I was just completely gone. She had scoffed and said, "You will come around eventually when you grow up." I had said absolutely nothing in response, and the call abruptly ended. I had not spoken to my sister Chloe at all. They did not reach out to me when I was freezing to death in a studio apartment with a violently clanking radiator. They did not reach out when I proudly signed my first major client in the new city, or my 10th, or my 50th. They only finally reached out when the bold numbers on their television screen had enough commas in them to legally justify a Sunday dinner. That is not how a family operates. That is how an invoice operates. But I was absolutely going to go to that dinner. Because I finally had something incredible to bring with me. I almost didn't answer her text at all. My thumb hovered dangerously over the delete button for a solid 10 seconds. Then I deeply analyzed the exact phrasing of her message. No excuses. She did not write when you have free time or if you want to see us. She wrote it like a royal summon. The exact same woman who silently watched my father brutally gut my first company and then gleefully set up the accounting books for the stolen replacement actually had the unearned confidence to send me a direct order. That overwhelming confidence told me everything I needed to know. She truly still believed that the pathetic, easily manipulated 4-year-old version of me was still fully operational. To properly explain what happened next, I need to rewind the timeline and go back exactly 3 years. When my second company, Sentinel Cyber Defense, was in its highly profitable 5th year of operation, I unexpectedly received a phone call from a man named Harrison. Harrison was 64 years old, owned a notoriously mediocre, mid-sized IT consulting firm in my hometown, and most importantly, had been my father's dedicated weekend golf partner for over 15 years. Harrison's consulting company had just formally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. He was completely broke, deeply bitter, and had absolutely nothing left in his life to protect, which inherently made him the most brutally honest person I had spoken to in a decade. Your father invested $75,000 of his own personal savings into my company, Julian, Harrison rasped over the phone, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Cash. Liquid personal savings. He did it the exact same month your sister started working at your little office. He explicitly told me he was going to forcefully redirect all of your clients to me first, because my firm actually had the technical capacity, and yours was, in his exact words, entirely too small to compete at scale. But when he made the calls, only 4 of your 14 clients actually came through my firm. The other 10 he panicked and passed to Chloe, simply because I did not have the internal staffing to handle the sudden volume. Harrison paused to let out a dry, hacking cough. When my company officially went under last month, your father lost every single cent of that $75,000. He never told your mother about the investment. He never told you. And he never called me again after the bankruptcy filing hit the public records. He just vanished. I sat perfectly still in my massive corner office, with the phone pressed tightly against my ear and the glittering city skyline sprawling out through the floor-to-ceiling window. I did not speak for a very long time. Harrison patiently waited on the line. He wasn't calling to help me find closure. He was calling because his overwhelming bitterness desperately needed an audience, and I was the only other person on the planet who would profoundly understand exactly what Arthur's secret $75,000 investment had truly cost. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper, because I lost absolutely everything I built, and your coward of a father walked away pretending like he had never even been involved. Harrison spat. He secretly pumped $75,000 into my company, intentionally stole your clients to artificially feed it, and when the whole house of cards collapsed, he pretended he was never there. I want someone to know exactly what kind of manipulative man he really is. And I figured you already had a pretty good idea. I quietly thanked him for the information and hung up the phone. I sat alone with that radioactive information for 6 entire days before I told a single soul, endlessly turning the revelation over in my head like a heavy, jagged stone I could not set down. My father had not destroyed my original company out of some misguided, patriarchal love for Chloe or a genuine belief in the power of her MBA. He had destroyed my life solely to protect a secret, high-risk personal financial investment in a direct competitor. Chloe was literally just the overflow receptacle. The entire arrogant speech he gave me by the kitchen island about my toy business and the broken printer was nothing more than a theatrical performance designed to make his own disgusting financial self-interest look like tough, fatherly wisdom. And in the end, the stolen investment returned absolutely nothing. The first person I finally told was Vance. Vance was my chief operating officer at Sentinel. We originally met 4 years into my rebuild when he was freelancing as an independent cybersecurity auditor. I hired him for a basic 3-month contract that rapidly turned into a permanent executive position because he was significantly better at the complex work than anyone I had ever interviewed before or since. Vance was 32 years old, surgically precise in his execution, and the only person in my entire professional life who knew the full, unedited history of my first company. He had asked the right probing questions during his very first week on the job, and I had trusted him enough to answer without editing the trauma. When I sat down and told Vance about Harrison's explosive phone call, he sat across from me in the glass-walled conference room for 2 full minutes without speaking a word. He was intensely reading my face the exact same way he read complex network security logs, quietly looking for the hidden pattern behind the raw data points. So, it was never actually about Chloe, Vance finally said, his voice terrifyingly calm. It was entirely about $75,000. And Chloe was just the convenient cleanup crew. She only got the clients that Harrison couldn't physically handle. The leftover 10. Vance leaned back in his expensive leather chair. He rhythmically tapped his silver pen against the glass table exactly once. Your sister's company, Apex Digital Solutions. Their quarterly revenue has been steadily declining for the past 24 months. I have seen their client retention numbers in the recent industry analytical reports. They are actively losing major accounts every single quarter. I already knew this. I knew Chloe's firm had peaked at roughly $2.5 million a year in gross revenue around year 4, and had been rapidly sliding downward ever since. The original clients she had stolen from me were slowly aging out of their initial legacy contracts, and without the deep technical infrastructure and genuine engineering talent I had originally built into the service packages, her product had thinned out into something entirely generic and easily replaceable. She was desperately running on aging referrals and her father's fading real estate introductions, and both wellsprings were rapidly drying up. You could easily acquire it, Vance said, staring directly into my eyes. I did not respond for a long time. The aggressive idea had been quietly sitting in the dark back of my head ever since Harrison's phone call, but I had intentionally not let it move forward because I was not entirely sure whether it was a brilliant corporate strategy or just pure, unadulterated spite. Vance watched me carefully think through the complex mechanics of the move. We run it entirely through a blind holding entity, Vance continued, entirely unprompted. She would absolutely never know the true identity of the buyer. It's a standard special purpose vehicle, SPV, corporate structure. Completely clean, completely legal. Your M&A legal team handles all the exhausting paperwork. She blindly signs the dotted line. She gets paid fair market value for a dying asset, and every single client she stole from you 8 years ago legally comes right back to the exact company they were stolen from. She will obviously find out eventually, but she will only find out exactly when you want her to find out. And that is the entire point. So, that is exactly what we did. Exactly 4 weeks before the massive $850 million acquisition headline hit the national news, my ruthless M&A legal team carefully structured the hostile acquisition of Apex Digital Solutions through a newly registered holding entity under a generic corporate name that had absolutely zero visible connection to me or Sentinel. Cyber defense. Chloe formally received an incredibly generous offer letter from what appeared to be a mid-market private equity investment group that was actively consolidating regional cybersecurity firms. The final cash offer was $1.8 million, the exact fair market value for a failing company with rapidly declining revenue and aging, unrenewed contracts. Chloe's expensive attorney meticulously reviewed the terms. Her corporate accountant meticulously reviewed the terms. Everything was perfectly clean because it was actually clean. There was absolutely zero deception in the legal paperwork itself. The only single thing Chloe did not know was the actual name of the man sitting behind the holding entity. And she was far too desperate to ask any hard questions. Because the massive check was real, her company was rapidly drowning in debt, and she desperately needed the financial exit. She happily signed the final documents on a Tuesday afternoon in a plush conference room at her attorney's downtown office. By Wednesday morning, the massive transition paperwork was legally filed with the state. By Thursday afternoon, every single client that had been forcefully stolen from my first company 8 years ago was legally back under a corporate roof with my name on the lease. The original 14 accounts had sadly shrunk to exactly 10 over the years as some businesses naturally closed or switched providers. But the 10 that remained were the absolute originals. They were mine before they were ever anyone else's. 3 days after my $850 million financial headline broke the internet, I drove my car to Chloe's office, my office now. The depressing strip mall parking lot was half empty, and the cheap sign on the front glass door still proudly said Apex Digital Solutions in dark blue vinyl letters that were noticeably starting to peel at the sharp edges. I had the master key provided by the acquisition team. The front receptionist was not in yet. The narrow hallway smelled strongly like cheap commercial carpet cleaner and stale, old coffee, and the flickering fluorescent light fixture above the tiny kitchenette buzzed at a highly irritating frequency I could physically feel behind my eyes. The remaining staff had already been formally notified of the corporate acquisition, but absolutely no one had been informed of the buyer's true identity. I walked right past the empty front desk and straight down a short hallway to the large back office where Chloe had comfortably worked for 8 years, pretending to be a self-made CEO. The 2 low-level employees who were already in the building looked at me like I was a complete stranger with a stolen key, which is exactly what I was to them. Chloe's large mahogany desk was completely clean, except for a small, dying succulent in a white ceramic pot and a framed photograph of her and our parents smiling brightly at some lavish charity event I had deliberately not been invited to. Her computer monitor was powered off. The familiar gray metal filing cabinet stood silently against the back wall. It was 3 drawers high, heavily dented on the left side where someone had angrily kicked it or dropped something heavy against it over the years. I instantly recognized it. It was my cabinet from the auto shop. I slowly pulled open the 3rd drawer down. Sitting right in the front was a thick manila folder clearly labeled Legacy Original Clients in handwriting that was definitely not mine. It was Chloe's loopy cursive handwriting. I pulled the heavy folder out and rapidly flipped through the organized tabs until I finally found exactly what I was looking for. The Miller & Sons Logistics intake form. My hurried handwriting filled every single line. My printed name sat proudly at the bottom. The date was exactly 8 years old. I slowly turned the thick paper over, and there it was. The coffee ring. It had faded into a light, almost translucent brown that was barely visible against the aging off-white paper, but it was absolutely unmistakable if you knew exactly where to look for it, because you were the one who had carelessly set the hot mug down. I stood there in the silence and held it for a very long time. There is a highly specific, overwhelming feeling that washes over you when you finally find something you painstakingly made with your own 2 hands, sitting securely inside a place that was built entirely on taking it away from you. It is not blinding anger. It is not smug satisfaction. It is pure, unadulterated recognition. The form fundamentally knew it did not belong there. It had been silently waiting in the wrong drawer, inside the wrong office, operating under the wrong corporate name for 8 long years. I honestly almost left it there. I stood there holding the paper and seriously thought about just sliding it back into the thick folder, closing the metal drawer, and walking out to my car. I thought about letting it stay permanently in the dusty archive of a dead company that no longer belonged to the person who stole it. But then I gently turned it over one more time and stared at the faded coffee ring, and I vividly remembered the freezing morning I filled it out. The cheap ceramic mug precariously balanced on the edge of a hollow door desk, the thrift store printer jammed and loudly humming, the broken water heater ominously clicking behind the server rack in the dark closet. I simply could not leave my own handwriting inside someone else's cabinet. I pulled out my phone and called Vance. He immediately dropped what he was doing and drove 40 minutes across town to meet me at the strip mall. When he finally arrived, I was sitting silently at Chloe's mahogany desk, just holding the form. He walked in, looked down at the paper, read the 8-year-old date, read the client's name, and heavily put his hand on my shoulder for exactly 3 seconds. "We are framing that," Vance said quietly. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. I carefully placed the intake form inside a secure manila envelope alongside the final, legally binding corporate acquisition papers, sealed the flap tight, and set it carefully on the passenger seat of my car. The family dinner was in exactly 4 days. On day 7, I finally stood outside the Blackwell family dining room. I had not been inside this suburban house in 8 years. The exterior porch light was the exact same cheap brass carriage lamp my father had installed when I was a junior in high school, though it had been sloppily painted over twice since then. The concrete front steps had been newly resurfaced. The mailbox at the end of the driveway was brand new. Everything else was exactly the same, including the large mahogany dining table clearly visible through the front bay window, meticulously set for a massive dinner like a theatrical stage arranged perfectly before the audience arrives. Martha opened the heavy front door and immediately saw Vance standing stoically beside me on the porch. Her practiced smile instantly tightened in the highly specific way it does when a room she genuinely thought she entirely controlled suddenly introduces a variable she did not plan for. "Who is this?" she demanded, her tone clipping the edges of politeness. "My chief operating officer, Vance. He is staying for dinner," I replied, stepping firmly past her into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. She did not verbally argue, but her sharp eyes immediately darted to the thick manila envelope tucked tightly under my arm and stayed locked on it for a half-second longer than was socially casual. "I will set another place," she muttered, turning toward the kitchen. Arthur was already seated at the table in his usual oversized armchair at the absolute head, and he quickly stood up when I walked into the room. He extended his hand with a wide, fake smile, exactly like we were meeting for the first time at a high-end corporate networking event, acting as if the last 8 years of absolute dead silence had merely been a minor scheduling issue rather than a direct consequence of his betrayal. I firmly shook his hand, solely because refusing to do so would have immediately set the wrong emotional tone for the absolute destruction I had thoroughly planned. Chloe was standing in the kitchen doorway, casually holding a large glass of expensive red wine, and she smiled brightly at me with the highly specific, delusional warmth of a person who has successfully convinced herself that the mere passage of time automatically heals the massive wounds she never once apologized for inflicting. "Julian, it is so good to see you," she purred. Martha served perfectly roasted chicken, seasoned potatoes, and fresh green beans, the exact same comfort meal she used to make on Sunday evenings when I was an awkward teenager and the family still vaguely functioned like one. Arthur generously poured the wine. Vance sat directly beside me and said absolutely nothing, silently reading the emotional dynamics of the room the exact same way he read a hostile security environment, meticulously cataloging every single exit and psychological vulnerability. The agonizing small talk lasted exactly 12 minutes. Martha politely asked about the sheer scale of the corporate acquisition. Arthur aggressively asked about my company's equity structure, the overall team size, the national client base, and every single question carried the heavy, unmistakable undertone of a greedy man who was actively measuring a massive pile of gold he desperately wanted a piece of. Then, Arthur leaned back heavily in his chair, swirling his wine glass in his hand, and delivered what he clearly believed was an incredibly generous, fatherly tribute. $850 million, he announced to the room. Not bad at all for a stubborn kid who started out playing IT above a noisy mechanic's garage. We always knew you had it in you, Julian. He said it exactly like a celebratory toast. He spoke as if the toxic auto body shop was just a charming, character-building origin story instead of the miserable office he had intentionally emptied. He spoke as if the desk made out of a door and the broken printer were just nostalgic, funny details in a massive success narrative that he was now publicly claiming partial authorship of. Chloe proudly lifted her wine glass in agreement. Martha smiled warmly. I did not lift my glass. I slowly set the thick manila envelope directly on the mahogany table right beside my dinner plate, and I looked at Vance. Vance cleared his throat. He opened the envelope and began reading aloud without a single ounce of vocal inflection. Without any personal commentary, speaking exactly the way a board attorney reads a devastating legal filing into the permanent court record. 4 weeks ago, Sentinel Cyber Defense officially acquired a firm called Apex Digital Solutions for a total cash payout of $1.8 million through a private, blind holding entity. Apex Digital Solutions was originally founded by Chloe 8 years ago. Its core original client base consisted entirely of 14 accounts previously serviced by Julian's first firm, which completely ceased operations immediately after those exact clients were forcefully redirected by Arthur. The entire dining room completely stopped. It didn't stop dramatically, it stopped quietly, the terrifying way a room stops when someone reads something aloud that absolutely cannot be taken back or argued against. Chloe set her wine glass down on the table entirely too slowly, acting as if she was desperately trying to buy herself time with the physical motion. You bought my company? She whispered, her face draining of color. I bought back exactly what was already mine, I replied, my voice dead and cold. Chloe's hand nervously moved to the thin glass stem of her wine glass and stayed there, gripping it so hard her knuckles turned white. I didn't know the buyer was you. The attorneys handled everything. The shell company, the holding entity, the paperwork. I had absolutely no idea. I know you didn't, I said smoothly. That was the entire point of the holding entity. She opened her mouth to aggressively say something else, but then instantly closed it. Martha was frantically looking back and forth between Chloe and me, desperately trying to mentally process what Vance had just read, furiously running the 8-year timeline backward in her head. Arthur had not physically moved a single muscle. His face was still stupidly holding the exact same proud expression it had worn during the toast, but the facial muscles underneath the skin had suddenly gone completely rigid with terror. I reached my hand directly into the manila folder and pulled out the original Miller & Sons intake form, sliding it across the table until it rested right beside the final acquisition papers. My messy handwriting, the faded brown coffee ring faintly visible through the back of the heavy paper. This was sitting in your gray filing cabinet, Chloe. Third drawer down. Inside a folder clearly labeled Legacy Original Clients. I filled this exact form out by hand when I was 24 years old, sitting in a freezing room above a tire shop with a broken inkjet printer and a coffee mug balanced on the edge of a desk I literally built out of a door. Arthur's terrified eyes slowly moved down to the form. He did not attempt to pick it up. He stared at it the exact same way a guilty person looks at a piece of irrefutable photographic evidence they genuinely forgot existed. Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Why exactly did you redirect my clients to Harrison's firm before you gave the leftovers to Chloe? Harrison's name landed in that dining room like a massive stone dropped into a perfectly still pond. Arthur's silver fork, which was halfway to his open mouth, instantly stopped in midair. He slowly set it down on his ceramic plate, and the sharp clink of the metal against the plate was the single loudest sound in the entire house. His left hand immediately dropped below the table and stayed there, gripping his leg so hard I could see his shoulder shaking. His mouth hung slightly open, his dry tongue darting out to touch his lower lip. He looked exactly like a trapped man desperately trying to remember the details of a lie he had told so long ago he had actually forgotten it was a lie. Harrison called me 3 years ago, Dad, I continued relentlessly. Right after his consulting company went totally bankrupt. He told me all about the $75,000 of your personal cash savings that you secretly invested in his firm. You redirected 4 of my biggest clients to him first simply because his company was the one you had your own money tied up in. The other 10 only went to Chloe because Harrison physically didn't have the staff to handle the massive volume. I leaned forward, closing the physical distance between us. You didn't destroy my company for Chloe. You didn't do it because you believed in her MBA. You destroyed my entire life solely to protect your own high-risk financial investment. And the best part? The investment returned absolutely nothing. You lost it all anyway. Arthur did not look at Martha. He did not look at Chloe. He just stared blankly at the glass salt shaker in the exact center of the table as if it was the only safe, Neutral object left in the entire room. Martha suddenly leaned forward. Her voice aggressively shifted into the exact shrill register she always used when she delusionally believed she was the only reasonable person in the room. You couldn't even keep a dozen clients when you were 24 years old, Julian. You desperately needed your sister's help, and you have the nerve to call it stealing. If those clients actually wanted to stay with you, they would have stayed. Your father helped you. The only difference is she actually knew how to keep what she was given. Whatever massive company you have now, you did not build it alone. Nobody builds anything alone, so stop acting like the entire world owes you a massive standing ovation just for doing exactly what Chloe did, but with more noise. I looked at her for a very long moment, letting her toxic words hang in the dead air. Then I finally spoke, and I did not raise my voice a single decibel, because the financial numbers were significantly louder than anything I could ever shout. 8 years ago, I had 14 clients. You personally called every single one of them, Dad. You used your name, your wealth, your reputation, and you aggressively manipulated them to leave me. You redirected 4 of them to Harrison's firm where you had $75,000 secretly invested. The rest went to Chloe. Mom. You happily handled all the bookkeeping for the theft. Nobody asked me, nobody told me. I came to my office on a Monday morning and the phone had completely stopped ringing. You didn't just take my clients. You took my first contract. You took my intake forms. You took my literal handwriting. You handed them to Chloe, and she locked them in a cabinet and milked them for 8 years. I stood up slowly from my chair. And when I built something massive from absolute zero, when I started over in a freezing city where I knew absolutely no one, when I worked 100-hour weeks for 8 years until my company was worth $850 million. The very first thing Mom texted me wasn't congratulations. It was family dinner. No excuses. You didn't have any excuses when you completely gutted my company. Mom, I do not need your dinner. Chloe's water glass suddenly tilted in her shaking hand. She desperately caught it, but a thick line of ice water rapidly ran down the side onto the expensive tablecloth, forming a dark, wet streak that quickly spread deep into the fabric. Arthur finally tried to regain control of the room, his voice shaking. This is just business, Julian. You are making this entirely too personal. You literally called it a toy business. I shot back. You called me a stupid kid with a broken printer. You proudly told me she would do more with my clients than I ever could. That was personal the exact day you said it. Martha opened her mouth to scream a response, but I was absolutely not finished. Mom, you just said nobody builds anything alone. You are absolutely right about my first company. Dad contributed heavily, he contributed the exact phone calls that killed it. But I built the second company from a plastic folding table in a freezing studio apartment with absolutely no investors, no family, and 0 phone calls from a father offering to help. That company is now worth $850 million, and your golden daughter's entire failing firm is nothing but a minor line item inside my balance sheet. I looked directly at Arthur, then at Martha, then finally at Chloe. You freely gave her my clients, and she managed to build a pathetic company that bled out. I started with absolutely 0 and built an empire worth $850 million. I bought hers 4 weeks ago. Nobody spoke a single word. Vance quietly closed the manila folder. Chloe was just staring blankly at the intake form on the table, staring at the handwriting that wasn't hers, staring at the contract for a client she had been billing for 8 years without ever actually earning. Chloe's company is now a direct subsidiary of mine, I finalized. Her remaining clients, my exact clients from 8 years ago, now report directly to my infrastructure team. The $75,000 Dad lost on Harrison's firm is gone forever. I am absolutely not replacing it. I am not funding a single thing in this house. I am not buying your retirement. And the next time you aggressively demand a family dinner, remember that the last time I was invited to sit at this table, it was so you could forcefully take my livelihood. This table has cost me enough. I reached down, picked up the original intake form, and slid it safely back into the folder. Vance stood up immediately. I pushed my wooden chair back, and we walked silently to the front door together. Martha just sat there with her hands folded tightly in her lap, completely motionless. Arthur had not moved a single inch since I had violently dropped Harrison's name into the conversation. Chloe was just blankly tracing the wet edge of the spilled water on the tablecloth with her fingernail, looking exactly like a person desperately trying to find where the line finally stopped. We drove back to the city in Vance's car. The dark highway was completely empty, and the bright yellow streetlights rhythmically ran over the windshield in fast orange stripes. Neither of us spoke a single word for the first 20 minutes. I was deeply thinking about Arthur's face the exact second I said Harrison's name. The terrifying way the color instantly left his jaw first, and then his forehead. The pathetic way his hand completely disappeared under the table like he was physically holding himself together to keep from collapsing. I almost softened the devastating blow when I saw his face at that table. He looked incredibly old in a pathetic way I had not noticed before, looking significantly smaller in his chair than the arrogant man who had proudly stood by the kitchen counter 8 years ago and called my life a toy. But then I instantly thought about the toxic tire shop, the wooden door desk, the 30-day eviction notice, and the exact phone calls he made over a weekend to erase everything I had built just so his secret $75,000 bet wouldn't have any local competition. He absolutely did not soften when he picked up the phone. I did not owe him an ounce of softness when I picked up the folder. Vance finally broke the heavy silence. Miller & Sons contract renewal is officially due next quarter. 3-year option. I'll send them the updated paperwork tomorrow. Exactly 11 days after the dinner, Martha finally called me. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was sitting alone at the office finishing a massive transition report. Her voice was incredibly quiet and highly measured. It was the exact kind of deliberate, practiced manipulative person rehearses in the bathroom mirror or in the car with the windows rolled up before dialing the number. She had thoroughly prepared this script. Every single word was strategically placed for maximum emotional damage. When your grandmother passed away, you were the one who held my hand at the funeral, Martha whispered softly into the phone. You were only 15 years old. Your sister just stood in the back, but you held my hand tightly for 2 solid hours. That is exactly who you are, Julian. You are the one who fiercely holds on to family. Please. Hold on to this family. She delivered the line exactly like a brilliant attorney delivering a closing argument. The dead grandmother, the tragic funeral, the innocent 5-year-old boy. She was desperately asking me to revert back to the exact version of myself that routinely sacrificed everything for people who violently sacrificed absolutely nothing for it. She was begging me to hold on when holding on was the exact fatal instinct that had cost me my entire first company. I held your hand at the funeral because nobody explicitly told me not to, I replied, my voice completely flat. You should have held my hand when Dad stole my company. I hung up the phone. She listened to the dead dial tone for 4 full seconds before finally putting the phone down. I know this because Vance was sitting right in the room when I made the call, and I sat there holding the phone against my ear for 4 seconds myself before calmly setting it face down on the desk. Vance did not offer any commentary. He just picked up his coffee mug and walked slowly back to his office. Some massive things simply do not need deep analysis. They just need a silent witness. On day 21, the senior managing partner at Miller & Sons Logistics formerly called Chloe. Her name was Sarah, and she had been Chloe's primary corporate contact for the entire 8 years. She had unwittingly signed the original transition paperwork when Arthur had forcefully redirected the account, and she had loyally stayed with Apex Digital through every single renewal cycle without ever once questioning the true origin of the business relationship. Now, however, she had very serious questions. I just received the final transition paperwork from Sentinel Cyber Defense, the massive company that just acquired your firm, Sarah said over the phone. Chloe, the founder's name is Julian. Your brother. The exact same Julian whose printed name is on our original intake form from 8 years ago. I actually have the scanned form sitting in front of me right now. It's his handwriting. Were we his original clients first? Chloe could not legally deny it. The intake form had my undeniable handwriting on every single line, and the contract date heavily predated the legal creation of Apex Digital Solutions by 3 full months. Sarah already knew the devastating answer before she even dialed the number. She was intentionally calling to force Chloe to say it out loud and admit the theft. We are obviously going to stay with the new corporate structure, Sarah concluded coldly. But I absolutely needed to hear you admit it. Sarah hung up the phone. Chloe just sat there with the silent phone pressed tightly against her ear for a very long time after the line went completely dead, listening to the suffocating silence in an office that legally no longer carried her name on the front door. On day 30, Chloe was forced to go into the office for the final corporate transition meeting. The cheap sign on the front door had already been physically changed to a temporary placard displaying the Sentinel Cyber Defense logo. Her remaining 8 employees were gathered inside the conference room, actively being briefed by my senior infrastructure director, a woman Chloe had never even met, about the new reporting structures and the massive system migrations. Nobody asked Chloe to join the meeting. She was legally no longer the person anyone in that entire building reported to. She walked slowly to her old office. The mahogany desk was completely cleared. The computer hard drive had been entirely wiped and re-imaged. The gray filing cabinet still stood against the wall with the third drawer slightly open, and she could easily see that the original clients folder was permanently gone. She slowly took the cheap plastic nameplate from the door, the one that proudly read Chloe Blackwell, Managing Director, and dropped it into her handbag. It was the absolute only thing in that entire building that had ever actually originated from her, and even that was mounted on a door frame she no longer legally owned. On day 28, Arthur drove his luxury SUV to the grocery store 3 blocks away from their house. He pulled into a parking spot near the absolute back of the massive lot, far away from the busy entrance. He turned off the engine, but he did not get out of the vehicle. His cell phone was sitting on the passenger seat. The screen was completely dark. He sat there in total silence with both hands tightly gripping the steering wheel for a very long time, just watching strangers push shopping carts through the automatic sliding doors. And then he slowly picked up the phone and scrolled heavily to my name. He held his thumb over the call button for exactly 9 seconds. I know this incredibly specific detail because Martha drunkenly mentioned it to Vance during a bizarre, desperate phone call weeks later that Vance definitely did not expect and I absolutely did not ask for. Arthur just stared at my name on the glowing screen, his thumb hovering, shaking slightly. And then he finally set the phone face down on the leather passenger seat so the screen pointed away from him, acting as if my name itself was something highly radioactive that he could not look at for longer than 9 seconds without it forcing him into an action he was entirely too cowardly to follow through on. He silently started the engine, backed out of the empty space, and drove all the way home without buying a single item. He never tried to call again. Arthur still sits at his giant mahogany dining table now. The wooden chair where I sat during the confrontation is permanently pushed in flush against the edge. The chair where Vance sat is pushed in tightly beside it. Nobody has moved them an inch. The massive table is now set for exactly 2 people most evenings. And Martha quietly clears away the extra place settings before Arthur even comes downstairs for dinner because staring at the empty chairs makes him completely shut down. The $75,000 is gone. Harrison's company is permanently gone. My new company is worth $850 million. And Arthur's influential name is legally on absolutely nothing. Not a single share certificate, not a board seat. Not a fake advisory title, not even a tiny footnote in the massive 400-page SEC acquisition filing. Chloe calls them significantly less often now. She quietly deposited the $1.8 million buyout check to cover her mounting debts and has not successfully started a single new venture since. The dining room is the exact same physical dimensions it has always been, but rooms inherently feel significantly larger and colder when half the chairs are permanently empty, and the person who used to fill them is absolutely never coming back. My new executive office is located on the 32nd floor of a massive high-rise building with a grand lobby that constantly smells like expensive marble polish and fresh espresso. The framed intake form proudly hangs on the wall directly behind my desk. Miller & Sons Logistics. $900 a month. My hurried handwriting on every single line. The faded coffee ring on the back is completely invisible behind the custom UV protective glass, but I absolutely know it is there, the exact same way I know the coffee mug was blue, the ink was still drying, and the tiny office smelled strongly like burning rubber from the auto shop below. I do not frame the $850 million corporate acquisition documents. Those are shoved inside a heavy black binder on a dusty shelf between boring quarterly reports, filed under the letter A, sitting right next to absolutely nothing important. I frame the $900 contract from the exact day I started because that is the one I filled out entirely by hand when absolutely nobody was watching. And that is the exact one they stole. And that is the exact one I ruthlessly brought back home. Vance knocks twice on my glass door. Miller & Sons officially renewed. 3-year contract this time, he says, holding up a folder. I nod slowly. The very first client came back. The first one always matters the most. My mom left me to go on a 2-week Bali trip with her new husband. I found 12 letters and chose a new family before she even cleared customs. My name is Elowen, and when I was 15, my mother abandoned me at the airport. I still recall her careless shrug as she handed me $200 and went away with her new husband and their children. That event at Gate 24 devastated all I believed I understood about family and love. What I didn't expect was how that horrible betrayal would lead me to the truth about my background, changing my life forever. Before I tell you how I went from being abandoned at Gate 24 to discovering my true family, believe me, you'll want to hear what happened when my mother arrived to find my room completely vacant. My early childhood memories of my mother were largely cheerful. I recall weekend outings to the neighborhood park, where she would push me on the swings until my stomach fluttered with delight. On my 6th birthday, she cooked a lopsided chocolate cake and decorated our small flat with homemade paper streamers. We had little, but we had each other. And at the time, that felt plenty. Everything changed when I was 8 years old. When I got home from school one day, I found my parents sitting stiffly at opposite ends of our ancient couch. The air felt heavy with anxiety, as they said they were getting divorced. The explanation was brief, stating simply, sometimes adults stop loving each other, leaving me with more questions than answers. I recall weeping myself to sleep that night, clutching my teddy rabbit as the faint sounds of their disputes crept through my bedroom wall. My mother was granted primary custody, and my father quickly withdrew from my life. Weekends with him decreased from every other weekend to once a month, followed by sporadic phone conversations that were increasingly unpleasant and brief. By the time I was 10, Dad was little more than a name on my birth certificate and a distant memory. Life as a single parent was not easy. My mother worked 2 jobs to support us: waitressing during the day and cleaning office buildings at night. I grew accustomed to eating microwave dinners and entering our flat with the key I wore around my neck. Despite our financial difficulties, our routine remained rather stable. I knew the rules, what was expected of me, and how important I was to my mother. When I turned 13, everything changed again. My mother met Cassian in the restaurant where she works. He was a wealthy businessman who left generous tips and requested her section whenever he dined there. I recall the first time she mentioned him, her cheeks flushing with pleasure as she recounted his fine outfit and the way he gazed at her as if she were someone exceptional. Their romance moved quickly. Within 6 months, Cassian had proposed to my mother with a diamond ring so huge that it appeared comically out of place on her work-worn hand. Before I could get used to the thought of having a stepfather, we were moving into his large suburban mansion, complete with a pool, home theater, and more bathrooms than I could count. Cassian's 3 children from his previous marriage lived in the residence as well. Aurelia was 14, only a year older than me, and her persistent expression of disdain made me feel instantly inferior. Ronan, 12, was silent and aloof, barely noticing my presence. Leora, the youngest, was 10 years old and first the most welcome, but her goodwill rapidly faded once we were all under one roof. From the start, it was evident that I didn't fit into this pre-made household. Cassian was cordial but remote, saving his true smiles and compassion for his own kids. Cassian and my mother talked private schools, country club memberships, and vacation homes during family dinners, topics I had never heard of before. When I talked, my remarks on school or books were welcomed with polite nods before the subject returned to the stepchildren's achievements in tennis, debate club, or piano performance. What stung the most was seeing my mother alter. The woman who had previously cut coupons and shopped clearance racks suddenly spoke intelligently about designer goods and exclusive eateries. She dyed her hair, whitened her teeth, and began referring to our old life as the struggle years, with an awkward giggle if Cassian's friends were present. It was as if she was shedding her old skin, along with the portions of herself that were attached to me. I was trying to blend in with my new step-siblings. I volunteered to help Aurelia with her arithmetic homework, complimented Leora on her artwork, and inquired about Ronan's video game collection. My efforts were treated with chilly politeness at best, and blatant rejection at worst. One particularly heartbreaking recollection was overhearing Aurelia tell her friends on the phone that her father's new wife came with luggage, which included me. As summer neared, Cassian announced a family trip to Bali, 2 weeks at a luxurious resort with private villas and personal butlers. Despite the growing gap between my mother and me, I had a burst of excitement. Perhaps this trip would allow me to finally bond with my new family away from the stresses of school and daily life. My aspirations were swiftly dashed when my mother brought the stepchildren shopping for new vacation attire, but excluded me. When I inquired why, she nonchalantly stated that I already had plenty of clothes. Despite the fact that the majority of mine were from our pre-Cassian days, I decided to use the money I had earned from babysitting to purchase myself a new swimsuit, a modest blue one-piece that paled in comparison to the designer bikinis Aurelia and Leora would be carrying. A week before the trip, I overheard a troubling conversation between my mother and Cassian. They were in their bedroom, the door slightly open, unknowing that I was passing by on my way to the kitchen. "What about the arrangements for Aloan?" Cassian inquired, his tone low. "All taken care of," my mother said dismissively, making my stomach knot. "She will not be a problem." When I asked her about it later, she dismissed my worries with a casual, "Just trip details, honey. Nothing for you to worry about." The morning of our trip was filled with chaos and excitement. The house was a hive of activity as suitcases were put into Cassian's luxurious SUV. I realized my passport was not among the stack of travel paperwork on the kitchen counter. But when I reported this to my mother, she grumbled something about having it in her handbag and hurried me on. Looking back, I should have spotted the warning signs: my mother's avoidance of eye contact as we drove to the airport, the fact that no one talked about my seat assignment on the plane as they were deciding who would receive the window seats, and the fact that my suitcase was curiously smaller than everyone else's. But at 15, determined to feel I belonged to this family, I ignored the warning signs. The international terminal was a hectic jumble of passengers, rolling bags, and frantic airline employees. Cassian guided our group through the mob with practiced speed, my mother by his side, clutching her luxury handbag. Aurelia, Ronan, and Leora followed closely after, their expressions filled with excitement. I followed in the back, struggling to keep up while rolling my small suitcase. When we arrived at the check-in counter, Cassian handed the airline attendant our passports and confirmation information. I observed he handed over 5 passports, not 6. I felt a knot in my gut as I saw each family member receive their boarding permits except for myself. "Excuse me," I said, moving ahead. "I think you forgot my boarding pass." The aircraft attendant seemed perplexed. "I only have 5 passengers listed for this reservation." Cassian cleared his throat. "Your mother needs to speak with you about that. We will go ahead to security." As the stepchildren and Cassian left with the luggage cart, my mother grabbed my elbow and led me to a quiet area near a gift shop. Her face bore a look I had never seen before. A curious blend of detachment and faint displeasure. "Listen, Elowen," she continued, her tone unusually calm. "There has been a change of plans. You are not coming with us to Bali." The words struck me like a physical blow. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong?" She groaned and looked across to Cassian and the children waiting in the security line. "Cassian thinks this should be a trip just for us and his kids. A chance to really bond as a family." "But I am family too," I shouted, my voice shaking. "I am your daughter." "Do not make a scene," she said, rummaging inside her purse. She took out a bundle of cash and put it into my hand. "Here is $200. You can figure it out. Just take an Uber home." I looked at the money in surprise. "You are leaving me at the airport alone? I do not even have a house key." She gave a careless shrug that would haunt my dreams for years. "Mrs. Voss next door has the spare. You will be fine. You are mature for your age." Tears welled in my eyes as the whole gravity of what was happening hit me. "Mom, please, you cannot do this." "Cassian is waiting," she added, looking nervously at the security checkpoint. "This vacation is important for our future. Elowen, sometimes we all have to make sacrifices." "A sacrifice would be giving up a concert ticket or postponing a shopping trip," I responded, my amazement giving way to wrath. "This is abandonment." She startled at the term, but immediately gathered herself. "Do not be so dramatic. It is just 2 weeks. The refrigerator is stocked, and I left money for pizza in the kitchen drawer." She leaned in and gave me a brief, dry kiss on the forehead. "I will call you when we land." With that, she turned and walked away, her high heels clicking on the airport tile as she returned to Cassian and the stepchildren. I watched in startled silence as they passed through security, my mother never looking back. Aurelia caught my attention quickly and smirked before they vanished from sight. I stood motionless, the $200 clasped in my quivering fist. Around me, the airport's typical rhythm continued. Travelers rushing to their destinations, families hugging farewell, and airline announcements resounding overhead. However, when the gravity of my mother's deception became clear to me, time seemed to stand still. As I slumped onto a nearby bench, hot tears streamed down my face without warning. Several passers-by gave me interested or concerned looks, but no one stopped. In an airport, a crying teenager was just another part of the scenery, easily noticed and quickly forgotten. I spent the next hour in a fog, staring at the departure board as their flight status moved from boarding to departed. Each update added a new twist to the story. I tried phoning my mother's cell phone several times, but the calls went directly to voicemail. My messages were delivered but stayed unanswered. "Having fun at the airport," I finally texted, fury briefly overpowering pain. "Hope abandoning your child was worth the first-class upgrade." No response arrived. Not that I anticipated one. By now my mother would have settled into her seat, probably sipping champagne next to Cassian, pleased to be free of the burdens of her prior life, including me. As the afternoon progressed into nighttime, my situation got more hazardous. An airport security officer approached me as I sat in the food court, drinking a beverage I had purchased to explain taking up the table. "Everything okay, miss?" he said, his expression a mix of suspicion and worry. "You have been here for several hours now." "I am waiting for my ride," I lied, avoiding his gaze. "They got stuck in traffic." He appeared doubtful, but nodded and moved on, warning me not to leave my suitcase unattended. I felt another wave of embarrassment flood over me. How could I admit that my own mother had left me? The words remained in my throat, pulled back by a mix of humiliation and lingering loyalty. As the evening throng dispersed and airport businesses began to close their security gates, the truth of my situation became impossible to ignore. The $200 would not last very long. Even if I made it back home, I'd be alone for 2 weeks, with no transportation and minimal cash. I found myself in the airport bathroom, spraying cold water on my puffy face and attempting to devise a strategy. The girl in the mirror appeared to be a stranger, her eyes crimson and disturbed. At that instant, I realized that something basic had changed. The invisible link that had kept me connected to my mother, the fundamental belief that she would always protect me, had been permanently broken. My mother had walked away 6 hours ago. I'd moved from bench to bench in the terminal, seeing families and couples go on journeys together. Each passing hour increased my sensation of solitude. My phone battery was running low, adding to my already stressful scenario. Around 8 p.m., I went to a still-open airport restaurant. I sat at the counter and ordered the lowest item on the menu, a side of fries, to stretch my restricted budget. The waitress, a woman with gentle eyes and a name tag reading Soraya, brought my dinner and then lingered to observe my face. "Are you okay, honey?" she inquired, her voice soothing. "You look like you have been crying." I tried a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I am fine. Just a long day." She did not press any further, but returned a few minutes later with a chocolate milkshake that I had not requested. "On the house," she added with a wink. "Whatever is going on, sugar and chocolate never hurt." Her simple compassion nearly broke me. I thanked her despite the lump in my throat and ate slowly while scanning through my phone contacts, looking for someone who could help. My selection of alternatives was disappointingly short. Most of my pals from before the relocation had moved on, and I hadn't met many new ones in Cassian's area. I tried texting 2 of my mother's friends, women who had been in our life before Cassian. One did not respond, and the other left a quick message indicating she was out of town. My mother's former support network appeared to have been completely abandoned when she went on to her new life, just like our modest apartment and cheap groceries. As I went through my contacts, a name stood out and made my heart skip a beat. Dad. I hadn't communicated with him in over 3 years. Our final conversation was a short, unpleasant phone call on my 12th birthday. After that, he seemed to vanish. My mother had always hinted that he didn't want to be a part of my life since he had a new family that came first. "Your father has moved on," she would respond when I inquired about him. "Some men just are not cut out for parenthood." I focused on his contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button. What if he rejects me too? What if my mother was speaking the truth and he didn't want anything to do with me? The notion of another abandonment was agonizing. I returned to the airport facilities and locked myself into a stall for solitude. I rehearsed what I was going to say, trying out various openings. "Hi Dad. It is Alawan. I know it has been a while." "No, it's too casual." "Hello. This is Alawan. I am sorry to bother you, but I am in trouble." Better, but still not perfect. In the end, necessity triumphed over pride. With shaky fingers I pressed the call button and held my breath until the phone rang. Once, twice, or 3 times. I was about to hang up when a deep voice responded. "Hello?" The sound of his voice, so familiar yet foreign, temporarily deprived me of words. "Hello, is anyone there?" he repeated. "Dad," I finally said, my voice small and hesitant. There was a pause, followed by, "Elowen? Is that you, sweetheart?" The anxiety in his speech struck a chord with me. "Dad, I need your help," I pleaded. And then the entire narrative came out in a blur of words broken by sobs. The remarriage, the relocation, the airport, the $200. By the end, I was hardly lucid. "She left you alone at the airport." His tone had shifted, with a steely edge replacing the first disbelief. "Where are you now?" "Which airport?" I informed him, half expecting him to offer to contact a social services organization or wire me money for a motel. "Stay exactly where you are," he stated sternly. "I am coming to get you myself. It will take me about 3 hours to reach you. Can you stay safe until then?" "You are coming here?" I inquired, my voice trembling with incredulity. "You do not have to do that. Maybe you could just help me get home." "And Alawan," interjected him. "I am coming to get you. Find the customer service desk for the airline your mother was flying with. Tell them your situation. I will call ahead and make sure they take care of you until I arrive." After he hung up, I stayed in the bathroom stall for a few minutes, trying to figure out what had happened. My father, who I had thought had little interest in me, was dropping everything to help me. It seemed too wonderful to be true, and my life's failures had taught me to be skeptical of hope. Nonetheless, I followed his directions and approached the customer service desk, my heart in my throat. To my amazement, the airline employees were immediately empathetic. They led me to a private waiting area, served me a sandwich and juice, and promised me that they would look after me until my father arrived. Unfortunately, this happens more often than you would think, the customer support manager said gently. Parents changing plans at the last minute, leaving kids to fend for themselves. The 3-hour wait seemed long and weird. I alternated between optimism, anxiety, and tiredness. What happens if my father does not show up? What if he did but disliked having to save me? What if this was all a setup for another rejection? My thoughts turned to the few memories I had of him before the divorce. Teaching me to ride a bike in the park, his steady hand on the seat as I wobbled forward, reading bedtime stories in a different voice for each character, and a Christmas morning when he built me a dollhouse, his face lighting up with delight. If he loved me, why had he left my life? Why hadn't he fought to see me? The questions swarmed in my fatigued thoughts as the minutes passed. As I was starting to doze off in the uncomfortable airport chair, a voice came over the PA system. Attention please, will Aloan Williams please come to the information desk? Aloan Williams to the information desk please. My heart rushed into my throat as I packed my small suitcase and followed an airline employee who had arrived to accompany me. Instead of going to the main terminal, we proceeded via a series of hallways and security gates until we arrived at what appeared to be a VIP terminal area. Your father has arranged for you to meet him here, the staffer said as we reached the glass doors leading to the tarmac. That's when I spotted it. A beautiful private jet with stairs leading down from its entrance. And heading down those steps was a tall man dressed in a business suit. His familiar visage made my breath catch. My father appeared different than I remembered. His dark hair was now streaked with silver at the temples, and he held himself with a confidence I had not seen since childhood, but as his eyes met mine, they were just as I remembered. Friendly and crinkled at the corners. For a time, we both froze, taking each other in from a distance. Then he strode forward, closing the distance between us in seconds. He stopped just short of embracing me, hesitation on his face. Aloan, he said, his voice full of emotion, I cannot believe it is really you. I wasn't sure what to say or do. Part of me wanted to fall into his arms like the little girl who used to meet him at the door. Another part, the devastated youngster who had felt abandoned by both parents, withheld information. He seems to detect my uncertainty. I am so sorry, he grumbled gently, for everything. For not being there, for not fighting harder to stay in your life. Something in his genuineness penetrated my defenses. The tears I thought were gone hours ago resurfaced with new vigor. She said you did not want to see me anymore, I gasped out. That you had moved on. His face clouded. That was never true. Not for a single day. He tentatively opened his arms, and this time I didn't hesitate. Stepping into his hug and releasing years of pent-up sadness onto his shoulder. We stood there for a few minutes, both overtaken with emotion. When we finally parted ways, he kept one arm around my shoulders and walked me to the waiting plane. Let us get you out of here, he asked gently. We can talk properly once we are in the air. The cabin of the private plane was unlike anything I had ever seen. Plush leather seats, polished oak tables, and gentle lighting produced a sense of peaceful luxury. A flight attendant greeted us cheerfully and offered me a variety of beverages and food. As we took our seats facing each other, I couldn't help but look at my father in astonishment. Is this your plane? He smiled, a tinge of discomfort on his face. The company's, technically. I am the CEO of Horizon Tech now. CEO? I repeated in surprise. My mother had always represented him as struggling financially, barely able to pay child support. It has been a successful few years, he replied simply before leaning forward, his expression serious. Aloan, I need you to know something. I have been trying to contact you for years. Birthday cards, Christmas gifts, phone calls, all of it. When your mother remarried and moved, I lost track of you completely. I hired private investigators who could not find your new address. I filed motions with the court that were somehow lost or delayed. My thoughts reeled as the implications of what he was saying hit home. She kept you away from me on purpose? He nodded, pain visible in his eyes. I have been sending child support and additional money every month since the divorce. Money you never saw. I remembered the second-hand clothes, the times we ate ramen noodles for days on end, and my mother's continuous concerns about money problems. We were always broke, I muttered. She said you barely paid child support. My father opened his briefcase and took out a folder, offering it to me. Inside were copies of cashed checks, court paperwork, and records of attempted interactions, all carefully arranged by date. The evidence for his attempts and my mother's lie was overwhelming. "I do not show you this to hurt you," he stated kindly. "But you deserve to know the truth." As the jet took off, transporting me away from the airport where my mother had abandoned me, I felt curiously weightless, as if I was shedding years of misunderstandings and manipulations with each mile. My father said that he now lives in Seattle and runs the technology company he helped start shortly after the divorce. What began as a small startup had evolved into a big player in the market, earning him unexpected success. "I kept your room ready," he replied with a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "All these years, just in case." The flight flew by as we started the delicate process of getting to know each other again. There were awkward pauses and intense feelings, but beneath it all was a river of true connection that felt both fresh and old. When we landed, there was a car waiting to drive us to his house. I plastered my face against the window as we drove through wealthy neighborhoods before turning into a private road that led up a hillside. The first house I saw was breathtaking, a modern edifice of glass and stone placed on a rock overlooking the ocean. "Home sweet home," my father remarked, observing my reaction with pleasure and fear. "I hope you will be comfortable here." A woman named Mireille met us at the door. I tensed up, wondering whether this was my father's wife, but he swiftly introduced her as his executive assistant, who had helped arrange for my arrival. "I have set up the blue bedroom for Aloan," she told my father. "Fresh towels in the ensuite bathroom, and I stocked the kitchen with groceries. The security team has been updated to include her in the household." My father thanked her, and she left with a friendly grin in my direction. He then took me on a tour of the house, each room more gorgeous than the last. When we arrived at my bedroom, I paused in the doorway, overwhelmed by the attention to detail. The room was painted a light blue and featured wide windows that overlooked the ocean. A sumptuous queen-sized bed dominated one wall, while a desk, bookshelf, and comfortable reading chair formed an ideal study nook near the window. But what drew my attention was the array of stuff on the dresser. "Are those—" I got closer, unable to finish the query. My father nodded with a loving expression. "Birthday and Christmas presents. Every year since I lost contact with you, I couldn't deliver them, but I couldn't bear not to buy them either." Gifts for each age group were organized chronologically. They'd been stored in their original wrapping paper. Beside them was a photo album simply titled Eloan. With trembling hands, I opened it to find the few photos my father had managed to collect of me growing up. School photos my mother must have sent during the early years after the divorce, a newspaper clipping of me receiving an academic award in 6th grade, and a blurry photo of me leaving my old school taken from a distance. "You really did try to stay in my life," I muttered, the realization setting in. "Every single day," he said, his voice hoarse and emotional. "And I am not going anywhere now if you will let me be your dad again." That first night in my new house, we had a meal delivered from a nearby restaurant because neither of us was ready to cook. The discussion flowed more smoothly as tiredness eased my guard and food replenished my energies. For the first time in years, I felt seen and heard. My opinions and feelings were valued and considered. As I finally slipped into the amazingly lovely bed in my new room, I was overcome with mental and physical tiredness. My last conscious thought before falling asleep was that perhaps being abandoned at the airport was not the death I had feared, but rather the new beginning I had always wanted. I awakened the next morning, little bewildered. The unusual comfort of the bed and the sound of waves crashing against the cliff below perplexed me. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and I sat up, taking in my new surroundings in the bright light of morning. The room looked much better than it did the night before. Sunlight flowed through the wide windows, creating patterns on the pale blue carpet. I ran my fingertips over the plush duvet, amazed at the contrast between this luxury and the existence I had known. After showering in the ensuite bathroom, which had a rainfall showerhead and more toiletries than I had ever possessed, I changed into yesterday's clothing and went downstairs. I discovered my father in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes with scant success. "Good morning," he murmured, looking up with an embarrassed smile and pointing to the malformed pancake in the pan. "I thought I would make breakfast, but it seems my cooking skills have not improved since you were little." The memory resurfaced unexpectedly. Sunday mornings when he attempted pancakes while my mother slept in. They were often weirdly shaped and occasionally burned, but Dad served them with pride, so I never complained. "I remember your pancakes," I murmured, settling into a stool at the kitchen island. "You used to make smiley faces with chocolate chips." His face lightened up. "You remember that? You were so young." "Some things stick with you," I said, taking the platter he gave. Despite their appearance, the pancakes tasted wonderful, and the familiarity of eating breakfast served to relieve our uneasiness together. After we ate, my father gave me a thorough tour of the house and grounds. The property was large, with groomed grounds that led down to a private beach access. Inside, the house had a home gym, a theater room, and an office with views that would make concentration hard for most people. "I have some people I would like you to meet today," he explained as we returned to the main living room. "If you feel up to it." An hour later, I was sitting across from a sophisticated woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Rowena Pike, a family law attorney. "What your mother did constitutes abandonment under the law," she stated, her tone professional but compassionate. "Leaving a minor without proper care arrangements is illegal. Additionally, there appears to be financial misconduct regarding the child support payments your father has been making." I shuffled uncomfortably in my seat. "I do not want to get my mom in trouble. You just want to be safe and secure," Rowena told me. "I understand, but we need to establish legal protection for you, especially if you wish to remain with your father." My father, who had been silently listening, leaned forwards. "Elowen, the choice is ultimately yours, but I want you to know that I am prepared to seek full custody if that is what you want." The thought was both horrifying and empowering. Can I really choose? "You are 15, Rowena said. "The court gives significant weight to the preferences of children your age, especially in cases involving abandonment or neglect." After the attorney had departed, my father showed me his office, where he had methodically documented every attempt to communicate with me. There were printouts of court files demanding visitation, records of unanswered phone calls to my mother, and even emails from my school that appeared to have never reached me. "She threatened legal action if I tried to contact you directly," he said, presenting me a letter from my mother's attorney from 3 years ago. "She claimed I was harassing her and causing you emotional distress." Each revelation added another piece to the puzzle, painting a picture of intentional estrangement that made my heart hurt. "Why would she do this? Just to keep you away from me?" My dad sighed. "I think it was more complicated than that. After the divorce, your mother struggled financially, which was partly my fault. I had not yet achieved success in my career. I think when the company took off and my financial situation improved dramatically, it was easier for her to maintain the narrative that I was uninvolved than to explain why she had kept us apart." My mother called 2 days after I arrived, just as I was getting used to my new routine with my father. I glanced at her name on my phone screen, a storm of emotions paralyzing me temporarily. "You don't have to answer," my father remarked gently, seeing my concern. After 4 rings, the phone went to voicemail. A minute later, a notification flashed, suggesting that she had left a message. With shaky fingers, I hit play and placed the phone on speaker. "Elowen, honey, there appears to have been a terrible misunderstanding." My mother's voice rose, deceptively bright. "I thought you understood the plan was for you to stay home during our trip. Cassian felt it would be good for you to have some independence, and I agreed. I did not abandon you, sweetie. That is such a harsh word. Call me back so we can clear this up. The resort Wi-Fi is spotty, but I will try to check my messages. Love you." The blatant distortion of reality made my stomach turn. There was no plan for me to stay at home, and no discussion about independence. She had abandoned me unexpectedly and was now attempting to gaslight me into disbelieving my own experience. "Classic," my father muttered while shaking his head. "She has not changed at all." I chose not to return the call. Instead, with Rowena Pike's and my father's backing, I decided to stay in Seattle permanently. The attorney started the process of filing for a change of custody by gathering evidence of my mother's abandonment and financial malfeasance. With the urgent legal issues in hand, my father turned his focus to practical problems. "You need clothes, school supplies, whatever personal items you want," he told me. "We can go shopping today if you feel up to it." The shopping experience was weird. My father's insistence that I chose whatever I wanted without checking price tags overwhelmed me, as I was used to thrift stores and clearance racks. By the end of the day, I had new clothes, a laptop for homework, and a phone with unlimited data. A stark contrast to the restrictive plan my mother had reluctantly granted. That evening, while sitting on the terrace facing the beach, my father and I had our first truly in-depth chat regarding the divorce and the years of separation. "Why did you and Mom split up?" I said, finally giving voice to a topic that had tortured me since I was 8 years old. He remained quiet for a long time, gathering his thoughts. "The simplest answer is that we wanted different things from life. Your mother wanted financial security and social status above all else. When my first business venture failed, she saw me as a disappointment rather than a partner facing temporary setbacks." "And you?" I asked. I wanted a true partnership. Someone who would weather the storms with me, not abandon ship at the first sign of rough waters. He glanced at me with a mournful expression. I never wanted to leave you, Elowen. That was the hardest part. Your mother used her custody rights as a weapon, gradually restricting my access until I was effectively cut out of your life. As the days passed, we discussed my future. My father contacted the premier private school in Seattle and made arrangements for me to begin classes in the autumn term. A child psychologist was hired to assist me deal with the abandonment and years of manipulation. Slowly, I began to imagine a world in which I was loved and supported rather than simply tolerated. 1 week after I arrived in Seattle, my father and Rowena Pike proposed that I remove my possessions from my mother's residence. With her still in Bali for another week, we had the ideal opportunity to enter the property legally, as I was still a resident, and retrieve my personal belongings without incident. You do not have to come if it would be too difficult, my dad informed me. I can handle it with the legal team. But I knew I had to do it myself as a crucial step in closing this chapter of my life. I want to go, I stated firmly. There are things there that matter to me. After making our decision, we meticulously planned the vacation. Flights were scheduled, legal documentation were drafted, and a moving company was hired to transport my possessions. As the date arrived, I found myself penning and redrafting a letter to leave for my mother, attempting to explain the severity of her betrayal and my resolve to forge a new path. 3 days before my mother was due to return from Bali, my father and I arrived at the house I lived with my mother and Cassian's family, joined by Rowena Pike and her assistant. I entered the front door with my key and found the house just as it had been left, eerily silent and untouched. Walking into that environment as a tourist was confusing. Familiar surroundings suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if I were viewing them through fresh eyes. For the first time, I realized that the images on the walls were largely of Cassian and his children, with my mother appearing infrequently. There were almost no images of me, and none of me with my mother. "Where is your room?" my father inquired calmly, placing his hand on my shoulder to reassure me. I brought him upstairs to the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, farthest from the master suite. Opening the door revealed my little space, clean but impersonal, devoid of the pampering apparent in the stepchildren's quarters we had passed. "This was your room?" my father asked, his voice full of amazement as he noticed the simple furnishings and lack of decorations. "It is fine," I answered instinctively, the protective response imprinted from years of being instructed to be grateful for what I had. His expression softened. "No, sweetheart. It is not fine. You deserved better." With the help of the movers, we started packing my possessions. Clothes were placed in wardrobe boxes, while books and school materials were packed in smaller cartons. I was picky about what I took, leaving behind anything that had been a gift from my mother or Cassian, and only taking what actually belonged to me or had sentimental worth. As I emptied my desk drawers, I discovered a box of treasures that I had almost forgotten, shoved to the back of the bottom drawer. The photographs inside were from before the divorce. My father had sent me a few birthday cards in the early years after our separation, as well as a small teddy bear for my 5th birthday. "You kept these," he exclaimed, his voice full with passion as I gave him the souvenirs. "I never really believed she was telling the truth about you not caring," I told her. "Not completely." In my closet, beneath a rack of shoes, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A stack of envelopes tied with a rubber band and addressed to me in my father's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the first one to discover a birthday card for my 13th birthday with a lovely inscription and a gift card that had never been used. I examined the envelopes one by one, each providing evidence of my father's ongoing efforts to remain in my life. My mother had carefully kept her efforts secret from me. Cards for each birthday and Christmas. A letter revealing his new address and phone number after moving to Seattle. Photos of him at his corporate headquarters, with a note expressing his desire that I might visit someday. "She kept all of these from me," I said quietly, tears flowing down my cheeks. "All this time, I thought you had forgotten about me." My father drew me into a close hug. "Never. Not for a single day." As the movers resumed their work, I strolled inside my mother's home office, motivated by a need to understand why she had gone to such great pains to isolate me from my father. Rowena had told me that personal records linked to me were legally mine to keep, so I started looking through the filing cabinet. In the divorce folder, I saw financial papers that supported what my father had told me. Monthly child support payments, considerably exceeding what my mother claimed to receive, were transferred on a regular basis into an account I had no idea existed. There were also court paperwork demonstrating my father's repeated requests for visitation, which were all denied by my mother using various bogus grounds. The most damning evidence was a draft letter to her attorney, dated around the time Mother met Cassian, outlining a plan to reduce my father's influence as she integrated into her new partner's life. I was referred to as a complication that needed to be properly managed to keep Cassian's interest. By late afternoon, the packing was done. As the movers carried the last of the boxes onto their truck, I sat at my now empty desk and penned the letter I'd been thinking about for days. "Dear Mom," it began. The formality of mother felt too remote, and the tenderness of mommy seemed impossible to reach. I expressed my sentiments of betrayal, not only from the airport abandonment, but also from years of being treated as a nuisance. I said that I had discovered the concealed letters and financial records, and that I knew the truth about her methodical attempt to keep my father from me. "I am choosing to live with Dad now," I said near the end. "Not as revenge, but because I deserve to be somewhere I am wanted and valued. I hope someday you will understand the damage your choices have caused, not just to me, but to yourself. Despite everything, I do not hate you. But I need to love myself enough to leave." I laid the letter on the naked mattress of what had been my bed, the white paper standing out against the bare blue sheet. Finally, I left the home key alongside it as a mark of my departure from this household. Walking out of that house for the final time, I felt a mixed mix of loss, relief, and resolution. My father waited near the car, his expression anxious. "All done?" he inquired. I nodded, unable to speak with the lump in my throat. He appeared to understand, opening the car door for me without more explanation. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I looked ahead, at the future I could now construct. My mother returned from Bali 3 days later. Within hours, my phone was inundated with notifications, an onslaught of increasingly urgent texts. "Where are you? Why is your room empty? Call me immediately. Eloan, this is not funny. Come home right now. I just spoke to your father's lawyer. How could you do this to me after everything I have done for you? Please come home, sweetie, we can work this out. I miss you." The texts followed a familiar pattern of wrath, manipulation, and feigned contrition. I showed them to my father and Rowena, who encouraged me not to answer until the legal proceedings were further advanced. A week after her return, my mother arrived unannounced at my father's house, having somehow discovered the address. The security system notified us of her presence at the gate, with her expensive SUV visible on the monitor while she repeatedly hit the intercom button. "You do not have to see her," my father informed me. "We can have security turn her away." But I knew this meeting was unavoidable and possibly essential. "I will talk to her," I responded firmly. "But I want you and Rowena there too." When the front door opened, my mother's face was a study in mixed emotions. Relief at finding me and indignation at the circumstances. She wore an expensive sundress and fashionable sunglasses pushed up into her nicely highlighted hair, the epitome of affluent suburbia. "Eloan, thank God," she exclaimed, moving up to embrace me. I took an instinctual step back, and her arms fell to her sides. "What is going on? Why did you leave? Why are you with him?" The final phrase was so venomous that I flinched. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," Rowena said. My father had sent me a few birthday cards in the early years after our separation, as well as a small teddy bear for my 5th birthday. "You kept these," he exclaimed, his voice full of passion as I gave him the mementos. "I never really believed she was telling the truth about you not caring," I told her. "Not totally." In my closet, beneath a rack of shoes, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A stack of envelopes tied with a rubber band and addressed to me in my father's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the first envelope to find a birthday card for my 13th birthday, containing a heartfelt message and a gift card that had never been used. One by one, I opened the envelopes, each containing evidence of my father's continued efforts to remain in my life, efforts that my mother had purposefully hidden from me. Cards for every birthday and Christmas, a letter explaining his new address and phone number when he moved to Seattle, photos of him at his company. I muttered, tears flowing down my cheeks. "All this time, I thought you had forgotten about me." My father drew me into a tight embrace. "Never, not for a single day." As the movers continued their work, I wandered into my mother's home office, drawn by a need to understand why she had gone to such lengths to separate me from my father. Rowena had advised that personal documents related to me were legally mine to take, so I began searching through the filing cabinet. In a folder labeled Divorce, I found financial records that confirmed what my father had told me. Monthly child support payments, far larger than what my mother had claimed. There were also court documents showing my father's repeated petitions for visitation, all of which were opposed by my mother with various fabricated excuses. The most damning of all was a draft of a letter to her attorney, dated around the time she met Cassian, outlining a strategy to minimize the father's influence as she integrated into her new partner's life. I was referred to as a complication that needed to be carefully managed to ensure Cassian's ongoing interest. By late afternoon, the packing was finished, and as the movers loaded the last of the boxes into their truck, I sat at my now empty desk and wrote the letter I'd been thinking about for days. Dear Mom, it began, the formality of mother feeling too distant, the warmth of mommy impossibly out of reach. I poured out my feelings of betrayal, not just from the airport abandonment, but from years of being treated as an inconvenience. I explained that I had found the hidden letters and financial records, that I knew the truth about her systematic campaign to keep my father from me. I am choosing to live with Dad now, I wrote near the conclusion, not as payback, but because I deserve to be somewhere I am loved and cherished. I hope someday you will comprehend the damage your actions have caused, not only to me, but also to yourself. Despite everything, I don't detest you. But I have to love myself enough to leave. I laid the letter on the stripped mattress of what had once been my bed, the white paper standing out against the bare blue sheet, and as a finishing touch, I left the house key beside it, symbolizing my departure from this family. Walking out of that house for the last time, I felt a strange combination of loss, relief, and resolution. My father waited by the car, his look anxious. Is everything done? He asked. I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat, and he seemed to understand, opening the car door for me without further inquiries. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I focused on the future I was now free to make. My mother returned from Bali 3 days later, and within hours, my phone was inundated with notifications, a barrage of increasingly urgent messages. Where are you? Why is your room empty? Please call me quickly. Alawan, this isn't funny. Come home immediately. I just spoke with your father's lawyer. How could you do this to me after all I've done for you? Please come home, sweetheart. We can work it out. I miss you. I showed the text to my father and Rowena, who urged me not to answer until the legal proceedings had progressed. The communications followed a predictable pattern of fury, manipulation, and feigned contrition. A week after her return, my mother arrived unannounced to my father's house, having somehow found the location. The security system alerted us to her presence at the gate, and her luxurious SUV was visible on the monitor as she repeatedly punched the intercom button. You do not have to see her, my father informed me. We can have security turn her away. But I knew this meeting was unavoidable and possibly essential. I will talk to her, but I want you and Rowena there too. When the front door opened, my mother's face was a study in conflicting emotions. Joy at finding me, and indignation at the circumstances. She wore an expensive sundress and designer sunglasses pushed up over her nicely highlighted hair, the picture of affluent suburbia. Alawan, thank God, she exclaimed, moving up to embrace me. I took an instinctual step back and her arms fell to her sides. What's going on? Why did you leave? Why are you with him? The last word was so venomous that I flinched. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside. My father proposed, his voice calm but forceful. Once sat in the living room, with Rowena as both legal counsel and witness, my mother's veneer began to shatter. Her gaze darted over the lovely space, soaking in the obvious riches and taste visible in every detail. So this is what this is about, she exclaimed with a brittle laugh. He enticed you away with promises of luxury. I should have known. That is not why I am here, I said, attempting to keep my voice calm. I am here because you left me at an airport. I came here because you have been lying to me about Dad for years. I'm here because I discovered all the letters and cards you hid from me. Her expression faltered and then stiffened. You went through my private belongings. How dare you? They were addressed to me, I said. They were mine to read. You are 15 years old, she snapped. And everything under my roof, including your correspondence, belongs to me. I was protecting you from his inconsistency and broken promises. My father, who had been quietly observing, eventually spoke. Vivian, there were no broken promises. Only your relentless attempts to remove me from our daughter's life. You have no right to judge me, she said. You have no idea what it was like raising her alone while you were off becoming a millionaire. I sent child support every month, he said evenly. Much more than the court required. You appear to have spent money on yourself while telling Aloan you were struggling. My mom's face reddened. That's a lie. I gave up everything for her, even dumping her at an airport so you could go on vacation with your new family. Rowena intervened, her professional tone making the charge even more damning, and my mother seemed at a loss for words for a moment before narrowing her eyes and returning her gaze to me. I have not abandoned you. I offered you the possibility for independence. If you had simply gone home as instructed, none of this drama would have occurred. The brazen distortion of truth made my chest tighten with rage. You abandoned me at a foreign airport with $200 and no house key. You didn't tell me to go until you were walking away. You did not respond to my calls or SMS. How is that an opportunity? You are twisting what happened, she insisted, her voice losing some confidence. My father leaned forwards. Vivienne, we have security footage from the airport. We have witness statements from airline employees. And we have the text messages you sent Elowen after the fact, attempting to conceal your tracks. My mother's face lost its color. You're developing a case against me. You want to take my kid and throw me in jail, after everything we've done for one another. This is not about punishment, Rowena emphasized. It is about determining what is best for Elowen going forward. She has clearly stated a desire to live with her father, and given the circumstances, the court is very likely to grant her demand. My mother's composure cracked completely, tears flowing down her cheeks as she turned to me. Elowen, please. I made an error. I was mistaken. But you can't leave me for him. We're a family. We stopped being a family when you decided Cassian and his children were more important than me, I quietly murmured. Maybe even before that, when you started lying about Dad. It was not like that, she said faintly. So what was it like? I said. Help me understand why you would hide Dad's letters, lie about child support, and then ditch me for a vacation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, seemingly unable to create a rationale even she could believe. Finally, she whispered. Cassian thought it would be best if you stayed at home. He stated that the resort was primarily for adults and his children, who were accustomed to that lifestyle. I was afraid of losing him. The direct honesty was more hurtful than her previous attempts at manipulation. So, you chose him over me. I chose financial security, she replied. Do you know what it's like to be a single mother without money? Cassian promised us a better life. He offered you a better life, I responded. I was just excess baggage. Before she could react, the front door opened and Cassian walked in, his face tense with rage. Vivienne, this has lasted long enough. Get in the car now. My father rose immediately. How did you get through security? Cassian ignored him and focused on my mother. I said not to come here. You're simply making things worse. Our lawyer told us not to make any contact. My mother appeared to shrink beneath his stare, her fleeting moment of honesty fading as she reverted to the obedient wife. I just wanted to see Elowen. And now that you have, he remarked dismissively. Let us go. My mother stood to follow him, and I yelled after her. Do you truly want this, Mom? Someone who treats you like a child and considers me an inconvenience? She halted, her countenance conflicted, but Cassian firmly grasped her elbow. The car, Vivienne. Now. The last sight I had of my mother that day was her back as she walked away, exactly like at the airport, except this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. In the aftermath of that confrontation, my father's legal team filed for a restraining order after Cassian attempted to enter the property again the next day. The court granted the order, and a temporary custody arrangement was put in place pending a full hearing. The most difficult part was accepting that my mother had chosen her new life over me. Not just once at the airport, but repeatedly over the years with each hidden letter and lie about my father. The girl who had once felt she was the center of her mother's existence had to face the awful fact that she had been, at best, an afterthought. The months that followed my mother's dramatic visit were difficult but transforming. My weekly sessions with Dr. Cressida Hale, a therapist specializing in adolescent trauma and parental abandonment, provided a safe space for me to process the complex emotions surrounding my mother's betrayal and years of manipulation. Creating new routines, establishing boundaries, and learning to trust that his presence in my life was permanent were all part of the adjustment process. What you are feeling is entirely normal, Dr. Hale assured me during one especially painful session. Anger, grief, relief, guilt, all of these can coexist. Healing isn't a linear process. With her coaching, I began to see that my mother's behaviors reflected her own brokenness rather than my worth. While this insight did not excuse what she had done, it did help me bear the load with less self-blame. People who are whole do not abandon their children, the doctor said. Your mother's choices speak to her limitations, not yours. My father enrolled me in Westlake Academy, one of Seattle's premier private schools, for my sophomore year, and the transition was both exciting and intimidating. After years of being the outsider in Cassian's home, I was wary of making new connections, but to my surprise, I found myself making genuine friends for the first time in years. Leora and Everin, twins who shared my love of literature, welcomed me into their friend group with an ease that felt almost suspicious at first. Juniper, a gifted artist who recognized my tentative attempts at sketching, offered to teach me proper techniques during lunch periods. I gradually began to lower my defenses, allowing these new friends glimpses of my true self. You are different from when you first came here, Leora said one afternoon as we walked home from school. Less guarded. I guess I am learning that not everyone has an agenda, I said, surprised by my own realization. Developing a relationship with my father was a delicate dance of rediscovery. We were getting to know each other as we were now, while also reconciling memories of who we had been. Sometimes the past and present were perfectly aligned, such as when he remembered my childhood love of stargazing and installed a telescope on the deck. Other times, the years of separation created unexpected gaps, moments of disconnect that reminded us of everything we had missed. I wish I could have been there for your first day of middle school, he said one evening as we looked at photos I had brought from my mother's house. Your science fair projects, your first crush. We cannot get those years back, I told him, surprised at the role reversal, me soothing him. But we have now and the future. He squeezed my hand, his eyes unsettlingly bright. When did you become so wise? Trauma has its benefits, I remarked, the dark humor a symptom of my ongoing recovery. After Rowena presented the overwhelming evidence of abandonment and financial misconduct, the judge ordered my mother to repay the misappropriated child support funds and established a structured visitation schedule that would begin only after I was compensated. The court granted my father full legal custody 6 months after I moved in with him. My mother, who was represented by an expensive attorney Cassian had hired, initially opposed the decision, but eventually agreed to it. It was more care than she deserved in my opinion, but my father gently reminded me that having a relationship with her could be beneficial to my long-term emotional health. You can be angry with her, even hate what she did, without severing the connection completely, he urged. But the choice is ultimately yours. I will support whatever decision you make. My mother's narrative had shifted from denying abandonment to framing it as a misguided attempt to please Cassian, as if that somehow made it less damaging. Even though the first few sessions were excruciating, she alternated between tearful apologies and subtle attempts to justify her actions. I just wanted us to have security, she said repeatedly. So you made sure I ended up alone at an airport instead, I said during one very stressful session. Over time, I established firm boundaries with my mother. I would not return to live with her despite promises or emotional appeals. I would not pretend the past did not exist, and I would not allow her to rewrite our history to relieve her guilt. These terms were non-negotiable, and she gradually seemed to accept them. My father remained unusually impartial during this process, never speaking ill of my mother despite everything she had done. When I confronted him about this restraint, his response stuck with me. Hating her will only damage you, he said. You are half her whether we like it or not. Besides, she gave me you, so I can forgive practically anything. My first holiday season with my father and his extended family, grandparents and cousins I barely remembered, was a revelation. The genuine warmth and inclusion I experienced stood in stark contrast to the performative family dinners at Cassian's house, where I had always felt like an unwanted guest. My paternal grandma, a vivacious woman in her 70s, approached me at Christmas dinner. You have your father's perseverance, she told me, her eyes crinkling with love. And his heart. But that spark, that fire when you talk about things that are important to you, that is uniquely yours. 3 years later they graduated from high school. My father was beaming with pride as I delivered the valedictorian address, and my mother sat awkwardly in the row behind my father and his parents. Our relationship had evolved into something cordial, if not close, based on careful honesty rather than the false harmony she preferred. In college I moved to the East Coast to pursue a degree in psychology with a minor in family law. The distance from both parents allowed me to define myself beyond the dynamics of their divorce and the drama of my adolescence. I discovered passions and strengths that I might not have recognized if my life had continued on its previous path. In my junior year, I interned with a nonprofit organization that helps children of divorce, and I used my experience to help others navigate similar challenges. This work eventually led to my career path, which is to develop programs for family courts to better consider children's needs during custody proceedings. The journey to forgiveness was long and non-linear. Some days, the memory of my mother's casual shrug as she abandoned me at the airport still had the power to steal my breath. On other days, I could acknowledge her humanity, flaws, and limited capacity with compassion rather than bitterness. My therapist had explained years ago that forgiveness does not mean that what happened was okay. On my 25th birthday, I wrote my mother a letter expressing my hard-earned understanding that people can only give what they have within themselves. I wrote, "Your capacity for unconditional love was damaged long before I came along. Recognizing this has freed me from anticipating something you can never deliver." Her response was surprisingly self-aware. "You deserved better than what I could be as a mother," she wrote back. "I am sorry for that, every day." When I married at 28, my father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. "From the moment you called me from that airport, all I wanted was to see you happy and whole," he whispered before handing me over to my soon-to-be husband. "Look at you now." My mother attended the wedding with her new companion, Cassian, who was long gone after their final divorce. She participated correctly, but without seeking to take credit for the lady I had become, a restraint that represented her own maturation over time. My mother taught me the value of self-sufficiency and the dangers of prioritizing status over genuine connection, while my father taught me the patient perseverance of true love and the courage to start over after a loss. These lessons served as a roadmap for me as I started my own family. The airport abandonment, which previously defined me, gradually became simply one chapter in a much longer journey, a critical point, but not the finish. In an unexpected way, being left behind spurred me ahead, forcing me to discover strengths I may not have discovered otherwise. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my mother had taken me to Bali that day, if she had chosen me over Cassian's preferences. Would I still be stuck in the cycle of seeking her conditional approval? Would I have discovered my father's unwavering love? Would I have found my voice and purpose? Of course, these questions have no answers. My father taught me that families are defined not by biology or legal documents, but by a consistent choice to show up, value, and prioritize one another. In her absence, my mother confirmed this. If you have ever felt abandoned or betrayed by someone who should have protected you, you know that their failure does not determine your worth. Family can be found and created in unexpected places if you remain open to connection, even after heartbreak. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care and best wishes. Parents orchestrated my eviction on my birthday. A decade later, they tried to seize Grandpa's estate, until lawyers said 3 words that ended them. My name is Lucas. I am 27 years old, and if you had told me 10 years ago that I would one day inherit my grandfather's whole inheritance, worth a staggering $3.5 million, I would have laughed in amazement. Back then, I had no idea whether I'd make it through the week, let alone to a lawyer's office with my estranged parents staring at me like vultures circling their prey. The irony is that these are the same parents that abandoned me at 18, sent me out with nothing but a backpack, and told me I was no longer their responsibility. Yet, here we are, with them reappearing at the will reading as if the previous decade had not occurred. Growing up, my family was complex. My parents weren't poor by any means. We lived in a comfortable suburban home. My father worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, while my mother was a part-time teacher who pretended to run the entire neighborhood. But they had a catastrophic fault. Appearance was everything. Sophia, my older sister, was the golden child. Straight-A student and cheerleader who never caused them any trouble. She could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was represented as a letdown. I was not rebellious. Not really. I just didn't fit the mold. I preferred art to sports, literature to vehicles, and I had a stubborn streak that made me question things they expected me to embrace. That was unforgivable for them. When I was a teenager, the cracks became more noticeable. When money was involved, it became a weapon. Sophia received a brand new automobile for her 17th birthday, whilst I was instructed to be grateful for hand-me-downs. She had her college tuition completely covered, whereas I was told that if I wanted to go, I would have to figure it out on my own. And when I tried to question why things weren't equal, I was lectured about being a man and earning my place. My mother would roll her eyes and say things like, "You've always been too sensitive. You expect the world to hand you things." My father would mutter about how I'd never make it without them. I'll never forget one evening at dinner when my father leaned across the table, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "If you're still under our roof by 18, you're a failure." I laughed, because what else could I do? But internally, I was crushed. When my 18th birthday arrived, they didn't just kick me out. They orchestrated it as a play. They sat me down, informed me they were cutting me off financially, and said, "It's time for you to learn the value of hard work." They provided me with no money, assistance, or even a safety net. I walked out of that house with a backpack, 2 changes of clothes, and a part-time job that barely covered groceries. That night, I slept in the back seat of my automobile. Meanwhile, Sophia was sharing Instagram images from her sorority home, smiling while holding a sparkling new MacBook and a credit card from her father. The only person who did not desert me was my granddad. He was my father's father, and he had always been distinct from the rest of them. My parents saw weakness, but he saw possibility. When others teased me for being silent, he responded, "Ol, that's because you think before you speak." He didn't care if I wasn't the athlete or golden child. He saw me for who I am. He'd invite me over on weekends, feed me, and let me sleep on his couch when things went tough. I never told him the whole scope of what my parents had done. But he was not foolish. He noticed the strain. He noticed how I flinched when my father's name came up. And over time, he became more like a father to me than my biological father ever was. Fast forward almost a decade. I'd created a modest lifestyle for myself. It was not glamorous. I worked long hours, saved where I could, and maintained a distance from my family. Sophia would occasionally send me smug texts about her travels or new house, reminding me that I was still beneath her. My parents remained silent, until they needed anything. Then, all of a sudden, I'd get a call from my mother. "Lucas, honey, how are you doing?" I knew better than to believe it. I always kept my responses short. I was not going to be their backup plan. Then came the phone call I had both dreaded and anticipated. My granddad passed away. It gutted me. Even though he'd been sick for a time, I was certain he'd recover. Losing him felt like losing the only true family I'd ever known. When the lawyer called to inform me that I would be attending the will reading, I expected to receive a watch or a letter, something sentimental. I never imagined me inheriting everything. When I walked into the oak-paneled office, I froze. My parents and Sophia sat there dressed as if they were going to a gala. My mother's smile was big. My father's hand rested smugly on his knee. And Sophia gave me this once-over, as if she were calculating how much I was worth today. I wanted to turn around and leave, but I pushed myself to sit. The air was thick with her phony sweetness. My mother leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, Lucas. We'll make sure the estate is taken care of properly." My father added, "Yeah, of course. We'll manage it for you." They had already begun to mentally count the money. I saw it in their eyes. They assumed I was still the weak youngster they had kicked out. But then the lawyer cleared his throat, shuffled the documents, and delivered the words that made my heart race. Per the wishes of the late Mr. Walter Montgomery, his entire estate, valued at approximately $3.5 million, is hereby left to his grandson, Lucas Montgomery. I swear time has stopped. I looked up, and for a single second, I believed I saw my grandfather's smirk in my head, as if he had planned this moment all along. My parents' smiles were frozen in place. Sophia's jaw actually fell, and then the lawyer turned the page and said, "There are additional stipulations you'll want to hear." Which is when things took a turn that none of us expected. My mother was the first to recover from the shock, but her voice was too high and pleasant, as if she was attempting to hide her worry. "Well, of course that makes sense," she responded, cheerfully clapping her hands. "Lucas was always so close to Dad. But naturally Lucas will need our guidance. He's inexperienced with finances. We'll step in, won't we, dear?" She glanced to my father, who nodded as if the whole thing was already determined. My father sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Yes, Walter meant well, I'm sure. But Lucas is not equipped to handle an estate of this size. $3.5 million is a lot for someone with no background. It could ruin him. It's only logical we manage the funds on his behalf." What he said gave my stomach a tighten up. They did not recognize me as a person. They saw me as a barrier between them and a fortune. Sophia smirked, tucking her hair behind her ear as if she could already see herself shopping with the money. "Honestly, Lucas, don't take it the wrong way, but you've never been, well, responsible. Remember when you maxed out that tiny credit card freshman year?" She giggled under her breath as if that one mistake defined me forever. "And Dad's right. A sudden windfall could really mess you up. Let us help." The lawyer cleared his throat again, cutting through their little performance. "If I may, Mr. Montgomery specified very clearly that the estate belongs to Lucas alone. No trustees, no oversight, full control." His eyes flickered toward me quickly, as if to suggest, "Your grandfather knew what they'd try to do." This did not deter my parents. My mother placed a hand on my arm, her claws pushing slightly into my sleeve. Lucas, sweetheart. You know we only want what's best for you. We can guide you through this, make sure you don't make mistakes. Think of it like a family effort. Grandpa would want us all to benefit. The word benefit weighed on the audience. Benefit for them, not me. I remained silent, attempting to keep my face neutral. But inside, I was seething. All those years of being told I wasn't good enough, of being passed over for Sophia, of sleeping in my car while they laughed at vacation photos, and now they felt they could sweep in and take control of the one thing my grandfather had left me. It wasn't even about money at that point. It was about their hubris, the belief that I couldn't manage my own life without their help. Sophia crossed her legs and leaned forward, her voice quiet yet condescending. Look, Lucas, you've done fine for yourself, I guess. But this is different. You don't want to end up like those lottery winners who go broke in a year, right? I mean, think about it. You're not even a homeowner. You still rent, don't you? You don't have experience investing. What if you blow it all? She blushed. It just makes sense that Dad handles it. He's been managing money his whole career. What she didn't say but I heard was that she assumed I'd always be the failure, the one who lagged behind, the one they could control. This time the lawyer didn't look up from his papers. Again, Mr. Montgomery's instructions are explicit. No one but Lucas is to control or manage the estate. My father's jaw tensed as he attempted a grin. Of course, we're just concerned, that's all. You understand, son? He spoke son as if it were a term of endearment, but it sounded empty. This was the same man who had warned me I'd never make it without him, and who had watched me pack my belongings on my 18th birthday without contributing me $20 in groceries. Now he wanted me to hand up millions in thanks. My mother uttered a small laugh, tilting her head. Lucas, you know, we always wanted the best for you. Maybe we were tough on you, but look how strong you've become. That was our way of preparing you. Don't hold grudges. Let's move forward as a family. I nearly choked from the hypocrisy. They prepared me by putting me out and allowing me to struggle while showering Sophia with everything. My grandfather had prepared me, not them. He taught me resilience, patience, and the importance of quiet strength. Nonetheless, I said nothing. I wanted to hear every last manipulative word. Allow them to dig their own holes. The lawyer proceeded to read through the requirements, but I scarcely recognized what he was saying. My parents were speaking to each other and planning. Sophia tapped on her phone under the table, likely texting her boyfriend about how wealthy she was about to become. I sat motionless, yet inside I felt something shift. After years of being discarded and nights spent wondering if I was worth anything, I suddenly had authority, which they despised. When the lawyer finished, my mother stood swiftly and smoothed her skirt. Well, thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Lucas, we'll discuss the details at home. You'll come over tonight, won't you? She said it as if it was all planned, as if I'd fall back into their circle. My father said, yes, we'll get started on a plan. Investments, property management, taxes. Don't worry, we'll take care of everything. Sophia leaned in close as we walked out, with that same smug little smirk. You're lucky, Lucas. If it weren't for us, you'd drown in all this. Don't forget who actually knows what they're doing. I tightened my teeth and held my fists at my sides. Lucky? No, I was not lucky. I was chosen. My grandfather saw through them all and chose to put everything in my hands. They were no longer in charge, no matter how much they tried to appear otherwise. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I felt deep down that this was only the beginning. I left the law office that afternoon, my head whirling, clutching a copy of my grandfather's will like a lifeline. My parents walked out with the brittle grins that come with suppressing disappointment, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back as I walked away. I knew them well enough to realize that this was not the end of their plans. It was merely the beginning. And I was not wrong. That evening, around 9 p.m., I had a knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, Sophia stood there, as if she'd just come off a runway, scent filling the air. She gave me the same sneer and slipped away without asking. Cute place, she murmured, raising her eyebrows as she looked about the little living area. But let's be honest, Lucas. This won't do anymore. You'll need something bigger, and you know who can help with that. Me. I closed the door gently, already fatigued. What do you want, Sophia? She dropped down on my couch and crossed one leg over the other. Simple. I'm here to make sure you don't embarrass yourself with this inheritance. You've been living small for so long, you don't even realize what you've got. Think about it. Dad knows investments, Mom knows people, and I She twirled a strand of hair around her finger. I know style. Imagine the three of us helping you. We could turn Grandpa's estate into something bigger, but only if you stop being stubborn. Her remarks stung not because they were true, but because they echoed every abuse my parents had ever hurled at me. Small, stubborn, and incompetent. She knew the script by heart. I don't need help, I stated firmly. Grandpa left it to me. Not you. Not them. Me. Her smile slipped somewhat, but she compensated with a laugh. Oh, Lucas. You really think that? You think Grandpa didn't expect you to lean on the family? You wouldn't even have met with that lawyer if Mom hadn't told you the time. That's when I understood she wasn't there to help. She came here to check whether I could bend. But the true betrayal happened a week later. I received a call from the lawyer, his tone clipped. Lucas, I need to ask, did you authorize any changes to the estate account? My stomach sank. No. What? There have been attempts to access the funds. Someone presented themselves at the bank as your representative. Luckily the bank flagged it because of the stipulations in the will, but they were very insistent, claiming you had verbally authorized it. I immediately recognized who it was. My parents. That night, I drove by their house. It looked just like I recalled. 2 automobiles in the driveway, the porch light blazing warmly, the epitome of suburban contentment. I sat there in the dark, hands grasping the wheel, staring at the home from which I had been exiled. And for the first time, I felt neither grief nor longing. I felt cold and calculated, because this wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was theft. They were willing to breach the law, fabricate, and lie in order to deprive me of what my grandfather had trusted me with. Sophia emailed me later that night, as if the cosmos wanted to twist the knife. Don't be naive, Lucas. Money belongs in the hands of those who understand how to use it. Be smart, or you will lose everything. I looked at the message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. That was when something snapped. The betrayal was not simply an attempt to steal from me. It was the understanding that they would always perceive me as the weak link, the throwaway one. They had cut me off at 18, laughing as I struggled to make ends meet, and now that I had something of my own, they wanted it as well. I set down my phone and sat in the dark, thinking about my grandfather. I remembered his voice, calm and forceful. The way he looked at me and said, "Oh, don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. You decide." I hadn't believed him for years. But now with my folks hovering like sharks, I finally understand. That night was the tipping point. I was not going to let them control me anymore. And I wasn't just going to safeguard what I owned. I was determined to make them regret underestimating me. But I had no clue how far they'd go next, or how vicious the fight was about to go. The days following the bank incident were some of the saddest I'd experienced since the night I was kicked out at 18. At first, I assumed I could simply disregard my parents' plots, cut them out entirely, and move on with my life. But that was not how they worked. They had a habit of clawing into every gap and forcing themselves into areas they didn't belong, until you felt suffocated. I started to notice unusual things. One morning, I went down to my car and discovered a deep scratch along the side. It was not arbitrary, it looked purposeful and jagged, as if someone had dragged a key from the front bumper to the taillights. Later that week, I received an email from my landlord stating that they had gotten numerous anonymous complaints about noise from my unit. I lived alone. I rarely played music and worked late most nights. Someone was obviously trying to cause trouble for me. Then came the murmurs. My parents still lived in the same town where I grew up, and they had their own small group of friends, the country club set, the church crowd, and the gossipy neighbors. When I was running errands around town, those individuals began to look at me differently. The grocery store cashier, who used to grin, raised her eyebrows as I paid in cash. The woman at the gas station whispered, "Must be nice living off an old man's money." I knew where it had come from. My parents had begun to portray me as the greedy, undeserving grandson who swooped in and seized the family estate. The worst part was not even the defamation. It was the silence. My few friends in town stopped calling. They had heard the rumors too, and perhaps some of them believed them. I'd worked so hard to build a reputation as someone dependable and trustworthy, and now my parents were ruining it all. I reached a low point one night as I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the mound of bills in front of me. Not because I couldn't pay them, I had money now, but because I was afraid. I was terrified that if I utilized my grandfather's money too freely, it would feed into the story my parents were crafting. I was terrified that every action I made would be used to prove that I was incapable of handling what I had been handed. That's when the old doubts came back. Maybe they were correct. Perhaps I was not strong enough. Perhaps I'll drown in this fortune, as they said. For hours, I sat there repeating every insult, dismissal, every memory of being told I was useless. It felt like I was 18 again, sleeping in the back seat of my car and wondering if I'd make it through the week. But then I opened the table's drawer and discovered something I had almost forgotten. My grandfather gave me an envelope on my 21st birthday. I had kept it for years without actually looking at it again. Inside was a message written in his firm, slightly wobbly handwriting. Lucas, if you're reading this, I hope you've realized by now that the world does not provide you anything it attempts to take. Don't let them. You are stronger than you realize, and one day you will need to show it. When that time comes, do not back down. Stand tall. They can only take from you if you give it to them. I read it often until the words became ingrained in my memory. My granddad had known. He saw through my parents long before I did, and he believed in my ability to overcome them. That night, something changed in me. I was still at rock bottom. Lonely. Beaten down. And overwhelmed. But I began to plan discreetly and deliberately. I started capturing everything. I retained copies of the bank's report on the attempted account access. I saved Sophia's texts. I jotted down every rumor I heard in town and where it came from. I began staying late at work, using the company's public computers to conduct research on estate law, trust funds, and property administration. If they wanted to treat me as if I was incapable, I would make sure I was the most capable person in the room. I did not inform anyone what I was doing. I smiled when people sneered, remained cool when my parents threw tiny jabs, and pretended to back down. All the while, I was silently constructing something beneath the surface. It was lonely and unpleasant. Every day seemed like walking a tightrope over an infinite drop. The silence, however, held a curious force. For the first time, I didn't respond. I was prepared. And I had a strong sensation that my grandfather would have been proud. I wasn't sure when or how. But I promised myself that one day the balance would shift. That I'd stop being the target and start holding the strings. I just had no idea how quickly that moment would come, or how violently my parents would try to force my hand. The transition did not occur overnight, but once it began, it felt unstoppable, like a tide suddenly turning in my favor after years of being pulled beneath. I kept my head down, worked long hours, and dedicated myself to learning everything I could about responsible money management. It was not about the money itself. Not really. It was about demonstrating to myself that I wasn't the defenseless child my parents had always described me as. The first significant turning point occurred when I engaged a financial advisor, not someone glamorous or connected to my parents' world, but a quiet, methodical man named Richard who was recommended by a co-worker. He was unimpressed with the size of the estate and did not treat me as a youngster. He sat across from me with a yellow legal pad, asking thoughtful questions and listening to my responses without judgment. By the end of our first meeting, he had delivered me a straightforward plan with diversified investments, tax coverage, and long-term security built in. "You're more than capable," he assured me as we shook hands. "You just needed someone to confirm it." Those words ignited something within me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just holding on to my grandfather's gift out of fear. I was building upon it. I utilized a portion of the estate to purchase a small home in a quieter area of town. Nothing extravagant, nothing my parents could mock at for bragging, yet, it was mine. Walking through those empty rooms the first night, I paused in the midst of the living room, allowing the silence to wash over me. Nobody could throw me out here. Nobody could tell me I didn't belong. The keys in my pocket demonstrated that I had finally carved out something real. At work too, things began to shift. I was just another name on the payroll. But, with my grandfather's letter in the back of my mind, I began to push harder. I volunteered for projects, worked late, and provided more than expected. People gradually began to notice. A tiny yet important advancement occurred. My manager stated to me, "You've got leadership in you, Lucas. You just need to believe it yourself." I did not broadcast any of this. I knew better than to tell my folks how wonderfully things were going. Eventually, news spread. Small-town gossip had a way of coming back. And soon, I began to hear whispering, which fueled me even more. "He purchased a house. He has a new job title." Perhaps Walter knew what he was doing after all. My parents' rumors were crumbling and being replaced by something else. Respect, albeit grudgingly. That regard worried my parents more than anything else. Sophia paid an unexpected visit to my new home one evening. I did not allow her cross the porch. She stood there in heels, arms folded, her face something between bewilderment and irritation. Nice place, she stated frankly. Did you decorate it yourself? Or did you finally get someone to hold your hand? I did not bite. I simply leaned against the doorframe and replied, I'm fine, Sophia. Better than fine. Her eyes narrowed. Don't get cocky, Lucas. You think one house and a job promotion means you've won? Dad's already looking into ways too. She stopped herself, biting her lip. But I caught it. Dad is already looking into how to what? Regain control? Undermine me? It did not matter. I realized then that they had not given up. And that's when I knew my rise was more than just survival. It was all about location. Every stride forward created leverage. Every success was a weapon that they could not take away from me. I began to associate with people outside of my family's circle. I joined a local charity board in my grandfather's name to celebrate the work he had done quietly for years. I worked with people who valued my grandfather's integrity and generosity. With each handshake and link, I was creating a web of support for myself that my parents couldn't break with rumor alone. Inside, I remained guarded, still bearing the scars of those early years. But for the first time, I sensed a quiet confidence growing. My parents expected me to stumble and drown in responsibility. Instead, I was learning to swim in waters far deeper than they had expected. Nonetheless, I kept my preparations covert. I knew the storm was not over. If anything, it was accumulating, and when it broke, I wanted to be prepared because I could feel it coming. My parents were not the type to accept loss in silence. They attempted manipulation. They tried stealing. They tried slander. None of it had worked. I knew the next move was going to be bigger and more desperate. And when the time came, I needed to be prepared to not just defend myself, but also strike back. The setup happened nearly by accident. In retrospect, it felt like my grandfather was guiding me even years after his death. I'd started going to more of those charity board meetings, which I joined in his honor. And at one of these events, I met Marcus Hale. He was in his late 50s, a retired attorney with piercing eyes and a calm demeanor that drew you in when he spoke. He had known my grandfather personally. They appear to have played chess together every Thursday night for nearly 10 years. When he learned who I was, his expression softened. Walter was a rare man, he stated firmly, shaking my hand. I hope you know how proud he was of you. The way he phrased it felt unusual, almost secretive. Later that week, while drinking coffee, he leaned across the table and said quietly, You should be careful. Your grandfather, he anticipated there might be trouble after he passed. He put certain protections in place. I froze. Protections? What types of safeguards exist? Marcus grinned slightly. That's something we can talk about more formally. But let's just say Walter wasn't blind to your parents' nature. He made sure the estate would be safeguarded in ways they wouldn't expect. If they overstep, it won't just be morally wrong, it'll be legally disastrous for them. For the first time, I knew I wasn't simply playing defense. I had ammo. Marcus spent the following 2 weeks assisting me in determining exactly what my grandfather had done. The estate was more than just a large sum of money. It was well planned. There were deeds, interests in a modest portfolio of properties, and even a trust set up particularly for altruistic undertakings in my name. More crucially, there were clauses, ironclad stipulations that directly disinherited my parents if they tried to intervene or identify themselves as representatives. My grandfather had written everything down, signed and notarized, as if he knew they'd try to take what wasn't theirs. Marcus spelled it all out piece by piece. And I felt something change inside me. All those years I thought I was alone, powerless, and struggling to survive. It turns out that my grandfather had planned for this very occasion. He had seen the storm coming, and he had given me not just the wherewithal to weather it, but also the power to fight back. My parents' confidence strengthened over time. I began receiving letters in the mail, formal-looking envelopes with their names neatly written on the bottom. Proposals about how I should divide the inheritance. One person proposed placing Sophia on the payroll as a family liaison. Another suggested selling off the estate properties to eliminate management issues, and then funneling the revenues into trusted family accounts. I didn't respond to any of them, but I did keep each letter properly packed in the folder Marcus asked me to keep. He told me that paper traces are powerful. Every word they write is another rope around their own neck. At the same time, I was moving up in my own right. Work acknowledged me again, this time with a big promotion that included increased authority and a place at the table during strategy sessions. People who had previously neglected me were now asking for my opinion and nodding as I spoke. It wasn't about money anymore, it was about respect. Genuine respect is acquired through persistence and ability. With respect came allies. The more people saw me come into my own, the more they quietly countered the rumors my parents had spread. At community functions, I overheard statements like, "Lucas's really turned out well," and "You can tell Walter raised him right." Each remark chipped away at the false image my parents had attempted to create. The nicest part was that they didn't know. They had no idea that while they plotted behind closed doors, I was gathering allies, records, and quiet power. They assumed I was still the boy they had sent out with nothing but a rucksack. They expected me to capitulate, hand over the reins and thank them for it. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was a man with power. They were unprepared for the power that was approaching. Then came the moment that brought everything together. Marcus handed me a little, worn-edged, leather-bound notebook one evening. "Your grandfather asked me to hold on to this until I felt you were ready," he told me. Inside were pages of my grandfather's handwriting, notes and comments, as well as a precise description of how to fight every move he predicted my parents would make. He had not only left me money, but also a playbook. As I closed the journal, my hands quivering, I knew something with absolute conviction. The time for just surviving had passed. I wasn't just going to defend what I owned. I planned to set the setting so that when my parents made their next move, I'd be fully prepared to destroy it. They wanted to play games with me. They had no idea I was already holding the winning hand. The breaking point came faster than I anticipated. My parents had been circling for months, writing letters, dropping hints to neighbors, and making not-so-subtle remarks whenever we crossed paths in town. But when they did make their move, they went big. Too big. Marcus called me on a fresh fall morning. His voice was quiet, yet it had a sharpness that I had not heard before. "Lucas, your parents filed a petition with the court this morning. They're claiming you're unfit to manage the estate and are requesting guardianship of the assets." Guardianship? They were literally attempting to deem me incapable at 27 years old. After everything I'd accomplished for myself, I nearly laughed when he told me. The absurdity of it is almost astounding. But then it hit me. This wasn't simply another attempt to manipulate me behind closed doors. This was public. This was them dragging my name through the mud and attempting to portray me as inadequate in front of the entire community. And it was their error. Marcus and I had been preparing for months, silently gathering every scrap of proof of their interference, the attempted bank access, the manipulative letters, the stories they'd circulated, the will requirements my grandfather had meticulously crafted. Piece by piece, we had constructed an airtight casing that virtually sparkled. The court date came on a gray Tuesday morning. I came into that courtroom wearing a basic suit, with no entourage or theatrics. My parents were already sitting, flanking Sophia like devoted warriors. They looked arrogant and cocky, as if the outcome was already decided. My mother even mustered the courage to grin at me, her look syrupy sweet, as if she was forgiving me for causing this show. But as the judge called us to order and my parents' attorney began his opening statement, the fractures appeared right away. He described me as irresponsible, emotionally unstable, and prone to financial recklessness. He mentioned my lack of experience and modest upbringing. Sophia nodded dramatically at each time, playing her part perfectly. And then it was our turn. Marcus rose gently, commanding attention without raising his voice. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a question of competence, but of greed." He started laying out the documents one by one. The fraudulent effort at the bank. The letters proposing that I relinquish authority. The SMS messages were filled with disdain. The will had provisions that plainly disinherited my parents if they sought to meddle. The courtroom became quieter with each piece of evidence. My parents shuffled uncomfortably, their smugness fading. Sophia's jaw hardened as her arms folded across her chest. Then came the final blow. Marcus raised the leather-bound notebook my grandfather had left me behind. "Mr. Montgomery anticipated this very situation. In his own handwriting, he described his concerns about his son and daughter-in-law's history of manipulation. He wrote, and I quote, 'If they attempt to take what is not theirs, it will be proof enough of why I chose Lucas.'" The words echoed around the courtroom, like a gavel strike. My mother's face paled, my father's fists tightened, and Sophia's gaze shifted to the floor. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was firm and definitive. "The petition is denied. The estate will remain solely in Lucas Montgomery's control. Furthermore, this court cautions the petitioners against any further attempts to undermine the explicit wishes of the deceased. This matter is closed." It was over in less than an hour, but the consequences were immediate. My parents' attempt to gain power not only failed, but also exposed them for what they were: deceptive, selfish, and desperate. As we exited the courthouse, my mother tried one more time, She reached out, her voice wavering with artificial warmth. "Lucas, sweetheart, we only did this for you. You don't understand how much pressure this is. Let us dash dash." I paused and gazed at her, calmer than I had been in my entire life. "No," I answered simply. "You did it for yourselves. Grandpa knew it. And now everyone else does too." Her hand froze in the air and dropped to her side. My father muttered something under his breath, but he could not meet my gaze. Sophia pushed ahead, her shoes clicking like bullets on the marble floor. I walked out of that courthouse with the weight of years lifted off my shoulders. Not only had I defended my grandfather's trust, but I had done so with a level of calm that they had not expected from me. They had consistently underestimated me, and their arrogance had finally caught up with them. But this was just the start of their reckoning. Because, while the courtroom had resolved the legal struggle, the true fallout, the social, personal, and irreversible, was still lurking just around the corner. The weeks following the court hearing were like watching dominoes fall one after another in slow motion. My parents had strolled into that courtroom expecting to win, believing they could bend the world in the same way they had bent me as a child. However, the judge's decision went beyond simply denying their petition. It had shattered the illusion they'd crafted over decades. When the mask came off, the entire community saw them in a new light. It started little. My mother's group of acquaintances at the country club, whom she had spent years talking with, began to drift apart. When she strolled into the room, talk came to a halt, unlike before when she had been the focal point. One woman even said quietly to me, "We had no idea how badly they treated you, Lucas." "I'm sorry." My mother attempted to maintain appearances, but the chilly smiles and hushed whispers informed me her image was deteriorating. My father fared no better. His company had learned about the hearing. Small communities have a way of spreading stories to every corner. His financial expertise suddenly became less valuable. Clients were tired, meetings were canceled, and rumors spread that he had been asked to retire early. The humiliation was painful for a man whose entire identity was based on his career. Sophia's fall was the sharpest of all. She had built her social reputation on being the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, and taunted me while receiving gifts. However, following the hearing, people viewed her differently. At gatherings, she was no longer the focus of attention. Instead, she was the girl who tried and failed to steal from her brother. Her lover dumped her shortly after, and I learned through the grapevine that she had moved back in with my parents. The three of them were once again living under the same roof, feeding off each other's bitterness like slow poison. Meanwhile, my own life extended in ways I had not anticipated. The estate was more than just money. It represented possibility. I invested in myself through undertakings that my grandfather would have been proud of. The nonprofit board grew in size, and I found myself taking on leadership responsibilities where my opinion was valued. For the first time in my life, I was not an outsider. I was not the disappointment. People respected me. But the most powerful moment occurred one evening as I drove by my parents' home. The same house from which I had been evicted at the age of 18 with just a backpack. The porch light was on, but the yard was overgrown, and the shutters needed painting. The house appeared tired and worn down, almost like the people inside it. I parked across the street for a time and watched. Memories poured over me, the night of my banishment, the years of derision, and the repeated comparisons with Sophia. For so long this site represented my failure and disgrace. But now, as I looked at it, all I felt was clarity. They had not ruined me. They'd forged me. Every insult, dismissal, every bitter comment had strengthened the resolve I now possessed. And then I realized my revenge was complete. Not because I embarrassed them in court. Not because they had lost their position. But I no longer required their approval. Their power over me was completely gone. I rolled down my window, letting in the cool night air, and said to myself things I'd never dared say before. Grandpa was right. I decide what I'm worth. With that, I shifted into gear and drove away, leaving the house and everything it meant behind me. They attempted to cut me out of their life. Finally, I cut them out of mine. When my parents threatened to sue me unless I gave my house to my sister, my lawyer laughed, and I realized I was finally free. Growing up, the pattern was clear. Serafina had the newest fashions, special tutors, and fantasy trips. I received lectures about hard work and independence. At 16, I was flipping burgers at a shabby country eatery while she prepared for a summer trip to Europe. When I brought it up, my parents advised me to recognize priorities. Translation: Serafina's future was more important than mine. I wasn't bitter at first. I just figured that's how things worked. Parents invest in the child they believe will succeed, while the other learns to fend for himself. So, I did. I worked through college, lived in tight apartments with roommates who forgot to pay rent, and avoided going out while my peers partied. Every paycheck, I set something aside. I wasn't sure why I needed a safety net. All I knew was that no one would catch me if I fell. After graduation, I realized I had two options: work in a low-paying job or take a chance. So I used my savings to create a tiny auto repair shop. It wasn't glamorous, and the first year was grueling: late nights, long hours, weekends spent elbow-deep in engine grease. But it paid off. By year 5, I was making enough money to seriously consider getting my own house. Of course, my parents were aware of this. I had voiced my desire to ultimately own a home rather than rent a shoebox flat, and each time I did, they would grin and the discussion would move. My mother would sigh deeply. "Serafina's been struggling so much. Rent is so expensive these days." My father would add, "She just needs a little help." It would mean so much if she had a stable place to live. They never said it outright, but the message was clear. I was supposed to be the one to fix her problems. Never mind that Serafina's difficulties were entirely her own. While I was working 16-hour shifts, she was living her best life: vacations, designer handbags, and nights out at upscale restaurants. But strangely, she was the one who needed assistance. Then there was the money. Over the years I'd been assisting my parents financially, covering home repairs, unforeseen bills, and even sneaking them additional cash when things became tough. I didn't mind at first; after all, they were my parents. But then I started noticing minor things, like how my mother constantly had a new purse and my father suddenly got a nice new watch. At first I assumed they had merely been saving. Then I recognized where the money was going. Serafina. My parents weren't struggling. They were simply funneling my assistance directly into her lifestyle. Then I overheard an exchange that altered everything. I'd stopped by my folks' place to drop something off. I hadn't planned to stay long, but as I passed past the kitchen, I heard my name. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I stopped in place and listened while pretending to check my phone. "I'm sure he'll do the right thing," my mother said. "He's responsible. He's been saving for years." My father agreed. "It only makes sense. He can't expect her to struggle. He's her brother." Struggle? Serafina? The same Serafina who had never paid rent in her life and still relied on my parents to pay her credit card bills? Something was not adding up. And then it struck me. They were discussing my money. I stood there, my heart hammering as the revelation hit. They had a plan. I would buy a house without being asked. Not for myself. For Serafina. And the worst part? They expected I would simply go along with it. Like it was apparent. As if it were my responsibility. I wanted to storm in and demand answers, but I knew what would happen. They'd claim I was being selfish. They'd talk about family, duty, and how fortunate I was to have succeeded while Serafina struggled. I have heard it all before. I needed to think, so I left without saying anything. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my little studio apartment, which had a flickering kitchen light that I hadn't fixed. I reflected on every time I had been told to wait my turn, every sacrifice I had made, and every time I had swallowed my rage and smiled. And I thought about Serafina, and how she would respond if she knew what they were planned. Would she feel embarrassed? Grateful? Or would she simply presume it was her right? I received an answer the next morning. Serafina contacted me out of nowhere, her voice full of enthusiasm. She went on and on about the new spot she had discovered. "It's perfect," she exclaimed. 3 bedrooms, a backyard. I can finally move out." I waited for her to say the most important part, that she had a plan to pay for it. But she didn't, since she didn't require one. In her mind, this was already decided. My parents had plainly ensured that. She even had the guts to say she'd let me crash in the guest room if I ever needed a place to stay. That was it. I realized I wasn't playing along anymore. The very following day, I did precisely what they expected. I bought a house. But not the one they had in mind. I did not tell anyone. There is no spectacular announcement, no explanations. I selected a place I adored, paid my deposit, and signed the papers. It wasn't big, but it was mine. The first thing in my life that I genuinely owned. I assumed I had time before my family found out. Perhaps a few months, or perhaps a year. But life has a strange way of hurrying things up. I was in the middle of putting together my new kitchen, peeling off the ludicrous "Live Laugh Love" stickers left by the previous owner, when my phone started exploding up. Missed calls and messages from my mother, father, Serafina, and even extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Then I saw the text that made my stomach drop. Why did we hear from the realtor that you bought a house? I didn't know how they found out. Perhaps the agent said anything to someone. Perhaps Serafina had been looking at the same listings. It did not matter. What mattered was that I had made a move, and the real struggle was about to begin. The moment the text appeared on my screen, I realized my calm housewarming period was officially ended. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, calls and messages, some angry, others concerned, all with the same undertone. Betrayal. I disregarded them. If I picked up now, I'd be dragged into a conversation where they distorted everything to make me the bad guy. Instead, I went back to building up my home. The previous owner had left behind some ugly wallpaper in the living room, and that was going to be the most distressing thing I had to deal with today. Then the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. I felt it in my bones. When I opened the door, my parents appeared less like loving parents and more like corporate officials, eager to talk about my breach of contract. My mother's face was a mix of disappointment and anguish, the kind of expression reserved for when I forgot to call home. My father had his arms crossed, as if he were preparing to negotiate a hostile takeover. Before they could even enter, I braced myself. The following 20 minutes were just as I expected: accusations, guilt-tripping, and the entire "we're family" speech. My mother went on about how Serafina was upset and didn't know where she would live now. My father made it obvious that they expected me to do the right thing. And my particular favorite, the reminder that after everything they had done for me, this was how I would repay them. They did everything for me. For example, as a teenager, I was forced to pay rent. Like asking me to pay for my own school, while they pay for Serafina's luxury outfit, allowing me to work 2 jobs while she enjoyed weekend spa trips. If anything, I'd repaid them tenfold. I could feel my patience wearing thin, but instead of snapping, I remained silent, nodded along, and let them talk. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing was ineffective. They were not here to listen. They were here to further their story. Then came the ultimatum. My mother, her voice full of artificial calm, informed me I had 2 options: give the house to Serafina or be disconnected. I had to control myself from laughing. Cut off from what? Whose love and support? The same affection and support that was always contingent upon certain circumstances. The same family that had never given me anything without asking twice as much in exchange. I assured them that I would think about it. Not because I would, but because I wanted them out of my home. They left looking victorious, as if they had surrounded me and forced me to submit. I took a big breath, entered my kitchen, and retrieved a beer from the refrigerator. Sat down and stared at my phone. More missed calls. Serafina had finally texted, and I could anticipate what it said. Something about me ruining her life, and how she had relied on me. I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Serafina sent a message, but it was not intended for me. She had unintentionally forwarded it to our family group chat rather than the person she was talking to. The communication had a detailed strategy for how she and my parents were going to break me. How they'd keep up the pressure until I gave in and handed over the house. There it was. As clear as day. Confirmation that none of this concerned fairness or family. It was a planned takedown, and I was just the fool who was meant to roll over. I snapped a screenshot, saved it, and then sat there for a minute. For the first time in years, I felt something different. There is no anger or sadness. Only clarity. They had never considered me family. I was only a resource to be called upon as needed. So, I made a decision. I was not going to argue. I was not going to explain myself. I was only going to show them how finished I was. The following morning, I began making my move. The following morning, I awoke with a plan. If my family wanted a conflict, they'd get it. But only on my terms. I was not going to fight or explain myself. I was going to take charge of the situation and make it clear that I was done playing their games. First, I secured everything. I called my bank and confirmed that only I could make adjustments to my accounts. I changed my passwords, safeguarded my key documents, and even installed security cameras around my home just in case. Knowing my family, I wouldn't put it past them to do something desperate. Then I contacted a lawyer. I had no idea if my parents could get me in trouble legally, but I wasn't going to take any chances. After describing my position, the lawyer informed me that as long as everything was in my name and I hadn't signed anything for Serafina, I wouldn't have to worry. That was encouraging news, but I was still not taking any chances. Later that day, I received an SMS from Serafina. She was willing to discuss, but only if I agreed to make things right. I ignored it. A few hours later, another text arrived, this time from my mom. She was worried about me and suggested we have a family meal to address everything. Yes, right. I was not going to fall for that trap. Instead, I chose to reverse the script. If my family felt they could influence me with pressure, I was going to apply some of my own. First, I went to social media. I published a simple post, nothing big, nothing explicitly addressing them. I just posted a picture of my new house with the message, "Finally home. Worked hard for this, and it's all mine." The reaction was quick. Friends and extended family began thanking me, commenting on how well I earned it. And then the real fun started. Serafina did not respond, but I knew she saw it. A few hours later, I received another SMS. This time, she wasn't as courteous. She yelled at me about how selfish I was, and how I had embarrassed her by making my purchase public. Apparently several of her acquaintances had queried why she wasn't buying a house if I could afford one. Her ego had taken a knock, and she was unhappy about it. Then came the phone call. This time it was my father. No more faking care. No more, "we're family" rhetoric. He was enraged, accusing me of embarrassing them and being ungrateful. I let him rant. When he eventually asked what I was going to do to rectify it, I responded simply, "Nothing." That's when the threats began. If I didn't do the proper thing, I might never be welcome in their home again. What's my response? Sounds like a win-win to me. For the first time in my life, I did not feel bad about standing my position. I didn't feel like I owed them anything, since the truth was that I didn't. I banned Serafina's number. I muted my parents' calls. Then I got takeaway from my favorite barbecue establishment, opened a cool drink, and sat on my new porch, watching the sun set over my hard-earned property. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. The silence did not last long. By the next morning, my email was overflowing with new messages. Serafina had gone into full meltdown. My parents had begun damage control. Apparently some extended family members saw my post and began asking inquiries. My parents didn't want anyone outside of their small circle to realize how bad things were. I could almost hear their conversations, my mother desperately attempting to spin the narrative so she wouldn't appear terrible, and my father moaning about family responsibility and how I had somehow betrayed them. And Serafina? Well, she'd gone nuclear. Not only was she yelling on the family group chat, but she was also venting her frustrations on social media. I scanned through her most recent posts, long theatrical captions about how difficult her life was, how she had been deceived by those closest to her, and how she was fighting to find a place to live. I nearly choked on my coffee when I noticed she had created a GoFundMe campaign. That's correct. She had launched a crowdfunding effort called, "Help Serafina Get the Home She Deserves." The audacity was nearly astounding. The description was even better. She portrayed herself as the struggling sister whose cold-hearted brother had refused to assist her during her hour of need. She conveniently left out the part where she was expecting a free house and had done nothing to deserve it. What about the donations? A grand sum of $20, likely from one of her equally entitled buddies. I had to admit that I was rather disappointed. If you're going to commit to the hoax, make it convincing. Still, the situation was becoming ludicrous. I needed to stop this before it went any farther. I didn't want to turn this into an internet family war, but I also didn't want to let them tarnish my reputation. So I decided to drop one final bomb. I created a second article, but this time I added some receipts, actual screenshots of Serafina's text message to me, in which she openly acknowledged to scheming with my parents to coerce me into giving her my house. I didn't provide any commentary, just screenshots and the caption, "Clearing up some misunderstandings." The internet handled the rest. Within hours, others began calling her out. Friends who had previously blindly supported her have now gone silent. Some even turned against her, understanding they'd been duped. Serafina erased her GoFundMe page and locked her social media accounts. My parents, too, were struggling to cope with the heat. Apparently, some extended family members decided to reach out and question why they thought it was acceptable to demand a house from their son while coddling their daughter. By the end of the day, the family group chat was completely silent. No more guilt-tripping messages or passive-aggressive calls. Just silence. And it was amazing. I sat back and watched the sun fall below the horizon, my phone empty of notifications. I had a refreshing drink in my hand, a playlist of my favorite music playing in the background, and for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop. I wasn't concerned with what my family thought or if I had done the proper thing. I'd done the right thing for myself, and that was enough. The hush lasted for a full week. There are no calls, texts, or anything. I anticipated my parents to make one more desperate attempt, but for the first time, they appeared to realize I wasn't moving. Perhaps the public disgrace had finally set in. Perhaps they were regrouping. In any case, I was not about to get comfy. Then, just as I was settled into my new life, another surprise arrived. Certified mail. A large envelope bearing my parents' return address, the kind that never contains good news. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in one hand and a letter opener in the other, prepared for whatever drivel was inside. This was a legal notice. My parents threatened to sue me. I had to read it twice to ensure that I wasn't having hallucinations. According to the petition, they claimed I misled them into believing I was purchasing the home for the family's benefit and that I had unjustly profited myself at their expense. That was absurd. I had never made a promise to anyone about handing away my house, but their desperation had reached unprecedented heights. What is the best part? They demanded financial restitution for the mental suffering I had caused Serafina. That's right. She was so upset about not getting a free house that they assumed she deserved money. I followed what any sensible individual would do. I laughed. Then I called my lawyer. The conversation was short. My lawyer could barely contain his delight as he told me that this lawsuit had no chance of succeeding in court. At best it was a fear technique. At worst it was a last-ditch attempt to coerce me into giving in. Regardless, I wasn't concerned. But I wasn't going to let it slip. If they tried to escalate things, I would immediately escalate them back. I made a few more calls, one to my bank to double-check everything was locked down, and another to a locksmith to strengthen my home security. Then I did something I knew would send them over the edge. I responded with a certified letter notifying my parents that any additional harassment would result in legal action. 2 days later, phone calls resumed, first my mother, then my father, and finally Serafina. I disregarded them all. Some left contrite voicemails, while others continued to guilt-trip me. My mother's was the greatest. She went from tearful to enraged in a single message, demanding to know how I could abandon my own family for something as insignificant as a house. Small. The irony almost knocked me over. Why would they go to court over something so small? Finally, on the third day, I answered when my father called. He cut through the chit-chat and got right to the point. They would drop everything if I simply decided to work something out with Serafina. I informed him that there was nothing to work out. That was the final straw. He exploded, ranting about how selfish I was, how I had deceived them, and how no son of his would ever treat his family in this manner. It was the same type of speech I had heard 100 times before. However, this time I felt nothing. I let him speak. When he finally ran out of steam, I simply told him I had nothing else to say. I wished him well, expressed my hope that they would move on, and hung up. And that was all. The legal threats were dismissed. The guilt trip is gone. My parents finally seemed to realize that I was not giving up. Serafina went radio silent. Either she recognized she was not receiving anything from me, or she found another subject to cling on to. For the first time in my life, I felt liberated. No more manipulation. No more obligations. Just me, my house, and a future that truly belonged to me. I'd won. The first several weeks of freedom were challenging. I'd spent so much time waiting for the next round of manipulation that it seemed strange to wake up without fear of receiving a passive-aggressive text or another family ambush. My house felt more like a home than a location I had to defend. For the first time, I was able to focus on myself. I established a consistent routine, getting up early, going to the gym, and making genuine meals rather than grabbing fast food on the run. I finally had the time and energy to enjoy the simple pleasures in life, like sitting on my veranda with a cup of coffee and watching the world rise up. It was the kind of peace I never knew I needed. But of course, peace does not stay long. One afternoon, while working from home, I heard a knock on the door. Before I saw, my intuition knew who it was. Sure enough, Serafina. She stood on my porch, looking less like the sister I grew up with and more like a door-to-door salesperson on the final day of the quarter. The entitled assurance was vanished, leaving behind an appearance of desperation. Almost. I did not let her in. Instead, I stood outside, arms crossed, waiting for whatever script she had written. She began with small talk, awkward and strained, as if she were reciting from a poorly rehearsed screenplay. Then came the true reason she was here. She reflected on everything and realized. She had been a little unjust. She informed me that she was no longer looking for a house, but rather a somewhere to stay for a short time. I almost laughed. A little while, correct? And then what? I let her move in, and now I'm paying her expenses while she sits on my couch, whining about how unfair life is. Not a chance. I kept my reaction simple. Her parents had gone above and beyond for her. Why not stick with them? That was when the full truth came out. She was no longer welcome there. Our parents' reputation seemed to have suffered as a result of what happened. Relatives who had previously tolerated their behavior were less likely to support them. Even Serafina's pals had distanced themselves. It turns out that when you go viral for attempting to defraud your own brother, people don't want to interact with you. Serafina was seeking for more than just a place to crash. She wanted to get away from the catastrophe she had created. I did not take the bait. I informed her I was no longer interested in performing that role. No hard feelings, but I was not responsible for resolving the issues she caused. Her demeanor shifted as soon as I said those words. The phony humility vanished, replaced by the same old anger. She labeled me selfish and claimed that families should support each other. I simply shrugged. She walked out in a huff, making a dramatic exit that would have worked when we were kids. But all I felt was relief. A few days later, I went to the mall to pick up some items. While standing in line at a coffee establishment, I heard a familiar voice. Serafina was speaking loudly to someone at a nearby table. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when your sister's voice sounds like a megaphone, it's difficult not to. She was whining loudly about how difficult life was today and how she needed to get this work. An actual job. Like a normal person. She complained about how stressful it was and how she couldn't believe people did this every day. Meanwhile, the woman she was speaking with appeared to be on the verge of telling Serafina that the majority of the population has always done the same thing. I bit my lip to avoid laughing. It was too wonderful. Instead of saying anything, I grabbed my coffee and passed by her table. She did not even notice me. However, as I stepped outdoors, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in my life, I wasn't dealing with Serafina's issues. Someone else heard her tirade about life's inequities. And you know what? That was all right with me. Later that evening, I received a text from my mother, a last-ditch attempt to guilt me into rethinking. Something about how family sticks together, and she couldn't believe how cold I'd gotten. I ignored it. They had spent years emphasizing that I wasn't truly a member of their family until I served a purpose for them. Now I finally understand something crucial. I was not cold, I was just finished. And for the first time in my life I felt no need to explain myself to anyone. Sister said I was selfish for leaving. Years later, she's overwhelmed and begs me to return, after realizing I raised her kids better than she could. My name is Kevin, and if someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd be living across the country from my family, entirely estranged from them, I would have laughed. Not because it appeared impossible, but because I couldn't picture a life in which I wasn't continuously required, available, and responsible for everyone else's children. I was the middle child in a family of 5 children. Rachel was 3 years older and living her life carefree. The twins, Liam and Lily, were 8 years old, and Noah, their baby brother, was just 5. My parents worked difficult professions, mom as a nurse working 12-hour shifts, and dad as a supervisor with variable hours. Looking back, I can see how things started. It wasn't malicious, just convenient. Rachel had a mall job, boyfriend, and social life. I was quiet, responsible, and seemed to have nothing else to do than babysit when needed. Kevin, can you keep an eye on the kids while I run to the store? Turned into, Kevin, I'll be back in a few hours. Which ultimately evolved into, Kevin, you're in charge until we get home. There was no conversation, no question about whether I had plans, only assumption. I understood how deep I was in this hole around junior year. I was in the library working on a college application essay when my phone rang. Kevin, honey, I need you to pick up the twins. Mrs. Henderson called in sick, so there's no after-school care today. I glanced at my half-finished essay. But Mom, I'm working on college stuff. Can't Rachel? Rachel has work. You know that. The twins are waiting. I packed and drove to primary school. The twins piled into the back seat of the beat-up Honda my parents let me drive for family emergencies, which evidently included any time they required chauffeur service. That became a pattern. School, then promptly pick up children, assist with homework, prepare snacks, break up conflicts, manage baths, and read bedtime stories. By the time my folks arrived home around 8 or 9, I was exhausted. "Thanks, sweetie," Mom would reply before heading upstairs. Dad would brush my hair and say, "You're such a lifesaver. I don't know what we'd do without you, kiddo." No remuneration, no recognition that I had just finished a 6-hour nanny shift. There was no awareness that I could have had plans, assignments, or a life of my own. Meanwhile, Rachel saved money for college through retail, went to parties, met guys, and had the typical adolescent experience that I was supposedly too responsible to have. When I mentioned it, Mom just sighed. "Rachel's different, Kevin. She's not as mature as you are. We know we can count on you." Translation: Rachel can be young and careless, but you are the dependable one, thus you can be a grown-up at the age of 17. When Rachel departed for college, there was no conversation about dispersing responsibilities. Instead, it was assumed that I would fill the void. The senior year became a whirl of squandered opportunities. Noah got the sick, and Mom was working doubles, so he couldn't join clubs, do SAT prep, or attend homecoming. "There will be other dances," she announced. "Family comes first." I returned my dress clothes and went grocery shopping instead. My guidance counselor began drawing me away. "Your grades are good, but colleges want well-rounded applicants." I wanted to say that I was well-rounded. I could change diapers, help with calculus, referee conflicts, and cook for 5 people in one afternoon. However, professional unpaid nanny was probably not what admissions committees wanted. Noah knocked on my door one night when I was filling out applications for local schools. He was holding his one-eyed pet elephant. "Kevin, I can't sleep. Can you read me a story?" I looked at the application and then at his optimistic expression. "Sure, buddy." As I tucked him up and read Dr. Seuss for the umpteenth time, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. I truly and deeply loved these children. But somewhere along the way, love morphed into obligation, and obligation into a cage. The tipping point occurred in February of my senior year. Rachel called home in tears. She'd failed 2 classes and been placed on academic probation. She needed to return home to straighten things out, which meant relocating to her old room and having Mom and Dad support her while she worked at the mall again. I was preparing after-school snacks for the twins on the day she returned, laden with suitcases and dorm decorations. She put her belongings in the living room and looked about. "God, this place is a mess," she exclaimed. "What happened to keeping things clean?" I asked, pointing to Liam assembling Legos and Lily completing homework surrounded by art supplies. "Kids happened. Kids that someone has to watch." Rachel shrugged. "Well, now that I'm back, maybe I can help out sometimes." Sometimes. The word hung in the air like a promise no one meant to keep. That weekend, Mom asked me to monitor everyone while they took Rachel out to supper to discuss her future plans. I spent Saturday evening assisting with homework, settling twin fights, and establishing bedtime rituals. They arrived home after 10 o'clock, giggling at something Rachel had said. "Oh, and Kevin." Mom turned to me as she walked upstairs. "Rachel needs the car tomorrow for job hunting. You'll have to find another way to get to school." I looked at her disappearing form. Rachel had only been home for a week, and she was already taking over the car I'd used for 2 years of kid transportation. However, it appears that her job search took precedence over my transportation to school. That night, I was unable to sleep. I opened my laptop and searched for full scholarships out of state. Most deadlines had passed, but one piqued my interest. The Morrison Foundation Scholarship for Youngsters Who Exhibit Outstanding Perseverance. Deadline: March 15th. It was February 28th. The essay prompt is: describe a struggle you overcame and how it prepared you for college achievement. I gazed at the blank document before starting to type. For the past 3 years, I've been the primary caregiver for my 3 younger siblings while keeping a 3.8 GPA. I wrote for 3 hours about missed opportunities and late-night homework sessions, budget-friendly meals and calming nightmares, love and contempt, and the difficult line between being wanted and being taken for granted. The Morrison Foundation provided full tuition, lodging, and board at 12 member universities. I applied to all 12, including ones across the nation that I had never truly considered. Then I waited. March and April were spent in standardized babysitting routines. Rachel assisted with children precisely twice. College rejections piled up. My local state institution accepted me with partial scholarships. Nothing that would allow me to genuinely depart. On a Thursday in late April, I received the call. My phone rang when I was making mac and cheese and assisting Lily with her math homework. Unknown number. Hello? Hi, is this Kevin Mitchell? This is Dr. Carter Kim from the Morrison Foundation. I'm calling with wonderful news. I almost dropped the wooden spoon. Lily glanced up, sensing something significant. You've been selected as one of this year's Morrison Scholars. Congratulations, Kevin. Your essay was extraordinary. The kitchen floor was swaying. What? Full scholarship to your first choice school, Portland State University in Oregon. 4 years, full tuition, room, board, and a stipend for books. Oregon is 3,000 miles away. A place where no one recognized me as the person who babysat his siblings. You deserve it. Your resilience and maturity shone through every line. After I hung up, Lily tugged on my shirt. Kevin, who was that? You look funny. I got into college. I got a full scholarship to college. That evening when my parents arrived home, I informed them about the scholarship. I expected joy, congratulations, and possibly pride. Instead, I experienced perplexity. Oregon? Mom asked, as if I'd declared I was relocating to Mars. But why Oregon? There are perfectly good schools here. It's a full scholarship, Mom. Full ride. Dad frowned. But what about the kids? Rachel's still getting back on her feet. We can't handle everything without you. I stared at him. I'm 18 years old, Dad. I'm supposed to go to college. Of course, Mom replied swiftly. We're just saying maybe somewhere closer, somewhere you could come home on weekends, somewhere you could still be on call for babysitting duty. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Morrison Foundation only gives out 20 scholarships nationwide each year. Rachel, looking through her phone, looked up. I think it's kind of selfish, honestly. The word landed like a smack. Selfish. You know Mom and Dad need help with the kids. You know I'm trying to get my life together. This feels like you're abandoning everyone because you got some fancy scholarship. Something broke inside my chest. Abandoning. I had spent 3 years raising children who were not mine. I had missed school dances, SAT prep, and other typical adolescent activities because I was here caring for everyone else's children. How is finally doing something for myself abandoning anyone? We never forced you, Mom responded, her tone becoming more lecture-like. You're part of this family, and family members help each other. Help each other. When was the last time someone assisted me? We nourished you, clothed you, placed a roof over your head, your dad remarked. Everything you did was for Rachel and Liam and Lily and Noah. You were just the unpaid help. The room fell silent, except for Noah, who was playing with toys, oblivious to the stress. Finally Mom spoke, her voice frigid. If that's how you feel, Kevin, maybe you should go to Oregon. But don't expect us to pretend we're happy about you abandoning your family. Fine, I replied gently. I'll go to Oregon. And since I'm abandoning everyone anyway, I guess you'll figure out childcare on your own. I went upstairs and closed the door. For the first time in years, I did not ask whether anyone needed assistance with homework or goodnight reading. The following few weeks were arctic. Mom spoke to me in short, icy sentences when absolutely necessary. Dad attempted to play peacemaker once or twice, proposing that I could compromise by attending a school closer to home, but when I refused, he gave up and joined the silent treatment. Rachel appeared almost pleased about the entire scenario. With me in disgrace, she suddenly seemed like the decent daughter in comparison. She even volunteered to help with the kids on a few occasions, ensuring that Mom and Dad saw her reading to Noah or assisting Lily with spelling words. See, I heard her tell Mom one evening. I told you I could help out more. Kevin always acted like he was the only one who could do anything around here. The twins, Liam and Lily, were perplexed by the tension, but wise enough to remain out of it. Noah, at the age of 5, just understood that everyone appeared upset and that Kevin was no longer reading him goodnight tales. I spent those weeks planning my escape. I learned everything I could about Portland State, Oregon, and being a college student 3,000 miles from home. I applied for a campus job and researched student groups that I might want to join. I began purchasing necessities for my dorm room with money I had saved from my part-time work at the local grocery store. 2 weeks before graduation, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. Kevin, this has gone on long enough. You're being ridiculous. I continued making my lunch without looking up. I'm being ridiculous? Yes. This whole Oregon thing is a tantrum. You're upset about some imagined slight, and you're punishing all of us for it. I put down the knife I was using to spread peanut butter and finally looked at her. Mom, in the past 3 years, how many school events of mine have you attended? She blinked. What does that have to do with anything? How many? I've been to plenty of your events. Name one. Silence. I made honor roll every semester for 3 years. I was in the National Honor Society. I gave a speech at the academic awards ceremony. I was selected for the peer tutoring program. You missed all of it because you were working, or because someone needed to watch the kids. Kevin, you know how demanding my job is. You went to every single one of Rachel's volleyball games. You went to her homecoming dance pictures. You threw her a party when she got accepted to college, even though her grades were terrible. Mother's face reddened. That's different. How? Rachel needed more support. She wasn't as naturally responsible as you. So I got punished for being responsible by being given more responsibility. And Rachel got rewarded for being irresponsible by having her responsibilities taken care of for her. It's not punishment, Kevin. It's family. No, Mom. Family is when everyone contributes. Family is when parents take care of their children instead of making one child take care of the others. Family is when a teenager gets to be a teenager instead of being a built-in babysitter. I picked up my sandwich and walked up the stairs. Where are you going? Mom called after me. To my room to work on scholarship paperwork, for the opportunity I'm being selfish about by accepting. Graduation day felt awkward and anxious. My parents came because not attending would have looked awful to the other parents, but they sat stiffly during the ceremony and then left without proposing we go out to celebrate. Rachel, who was working at the mall that day, greeted us at home later. How was graduation? She inquired, not glancing up from her phone. Fine, I said. Cool. That was the extent to which my family acknowledged my high school graduation. 3 days later, Mom discovered me putting boxes in my room. You're really doing this, she stated. It was not a question. Yes. We've decided that if you go to Oregon, you shouldn't expect to come back here for holidays or summers. If you want to abandon your family, then you're on your own. I glanced up from the box of books I was packing. Are you disowning me? We're not disowning you. We're just making it clear that if you choose to leave, you can't expect us to welcome you back when it's convenient for you. So, you're disowning me? Mom's mouth constricted. Think of it however you want, Kevin, but don't come crying to us when you realize how hard it is to make it on your own. The morning I went for Portland, just Noah came downstairs to say goodbye. He was still wearing his pajamas and clutching his toy elephant. Are you coming back? He inquired, his 5-year-old expression serious. I kneeled down to his level. I don't know, buddy, but I'll miss you. He hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I considered changing my decision. Almost. But then I remembered that, as much as I adore Noah's hugs, they were not worth jeopardizing my entire future. Take care of yourself, okay? Be good for Mom and Dad. He nodded earnestly, as if I had given him an important duty. I packed my car with everything important to me and drove away from the house where I'd spent the last 18 years caring for everyone. In the rearview mirror, I saw Noah standing in the doorway, waving in his dinosaur pajamas. Portland exceeded all of my expectations. My dorm room was small, but it was mine. My roommate Matt came from California and had no knowledge of my family or my reputation as the responsible one. To him, I was just Kevin, a freshman psychology major who was interested in child development. The irony was not lost on me. For the first time in years, I had full control over my schedule. Classes, study time, meals when I wanted to eat them, and sleep when I was genuinely weary, not when the last child had gone to bed. I joined the psychology club and started tutoring at a local elementary school. I made friends who knew me for being funny, smart, and shockingly good at beer pong, rather than the man who had to leave early to babysit. I contacted home twice during my first semester. Both times, whoever responded was nice but distant. Yes, everyone was okay. Yes, they'd made plans for the children. There was no genuine news to report. I stopped calling. The Morrison Foundation grant included a mentorship program, and I was assigned to Dr. Elaine Carter, a psychology professor with expertise in family dynamics and child development. During our monthly coffee meetings, Mary assisted me in processing not only my academic ambitions but also the complex emotions I felt concerning my family. It's normal to feel guilty, she explained during one of our meetings. You were parentified as a child, forced to take on adult responsibilities before you were ready. When parentified children finally set boundaries, they often struggle with feelings of guilt and abandonment, even though they're the ones who were originally abandoned by their parents. But I did abandon them, I said. The kids needed help, and I left. The kids needed their parents to figure out appropriate childcare, not to continue relying on their older son to sacrifice his future. You modeled something important for them, that it's okay to prioritize your own well-being, and that adults should be responsible for their own choices. It took 2 years of treatment and numerous sessions with Dr. Carter before I realized that quitting had not been selfish. It had been survival. By junior year, I was thriving. I had a 3.9 GPA, a part-time job as a research assistant, and a girlfriend named Grace who thought my childhood memories were sad and out of the ordinary. I was applying to graduate school programs in child psychology, motivated by my own experiences but now able to perceive them through a professional rather than personal lens. I had established a life in Portland. I had friends, teachers who recognized my name and potential, internship prospects, and a sense of self as an individual rather than just an extension of my family's demands. For the first time in my life, I was content. Then, one Tuesday evening in October of my junior year, my phone rang. I almost didn't respond. I didn't recognize the number, but something compelled me to take it up. "Hello, Kevin. It's Rachel." I sat down on my dorm bed. I hadn't spoken to my sister in over 2 years. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Hi. How are you?" "I'm fine. How are you?" There was a pause. "I'm well. I'm pregnant." I waited for her to proceed. "And I'm no longer with my father, and I'm living at home with Mom and Dad." Her voice trembled. "Kevin, I don't know how you did it. I can't handle the twins and Noah and everything, and now I'm going to have a baby, and I don't know what to do." The irony was astounding. Rachel, who had labeled me selfish for leaving, was now seeing just how much effort I'd been doing all these years. "Have you talked to Mom and Dad about getting help?" I asked them. "They're working even more hours now. Dad got laid off last year and had to take a job at a different plant with worse pay, so Mom picked up extra shifts. They're barely home, and when they are, they're exhausted." "What about professional childcare?" Rachel laughed, but it sounded like tears. "With what money? Do you know how much daycare costs for 3 kids? Even if we could find someone to take Noah after school and watch the twins all summer, we can't afford it." I felt the old familiar tug of remorse and obligation. She was continuing talking about my siblings. Noah was 7 now, and the twins were 10. They were children, and they needed to be cared for. But then I remembered Dr. Carter, and all our discussions about limits, enabling, and the distinction between assisting and fixing. I reflected on my life in Portland, the graduate school applications on my desk, and the research project I was working on, which could lead to publication. "Rachel, I'm sorry you're struggling, but I can't come back." "I'm not asking you to come back permanently," she replied hurriedly. "Just for a while, just until I figure things out, just until the baby comes and I can get back on my feet." "And then what?" "You'll be a single mother with 4 kids to take care of instead of 3. How is that going to be easier?" "Kevin, please. I'm desperate. I was wrong before. I know I was wrong. You weren't selfish. I get it now. I'm sorry." I had been waiting for an apology for years, but it came at the worst possible time and for the wrong reasons. "Rachel, me coming back won't solve the problem. It will just enable everyone to avoid solving it themselves. Mom and Dad need to figure out sustainable childcare arrangements. You need to figure out your situation with the baby. The twins and Noah need stability that doesn't depend on whether or not I'm available to provide it." "So, you're just going to let your family fall apart?" There it was. The manipulation I was expecting. Even though I lived 3,000 miles away, I was responsible for my family's troubles. "My family fell apart years ago," I answered gently. "When parents decided that one child's future was less important than their convenience. When you called me selfish for accepting an opportunity that could change my entire life. When I was disowned for refusing to sacrifice my education to be your permanent babysitter." Rachel was crying now. "Kevin, please. I know we messed up, but we need you. You need help. You don't need me specifically. There are resources, Rachel. Look into state programs for single mothers. Look into sliding scale childcare. Look into family support services. But don't call me asking to resume a role that nearly destroyed me. I don't know how to do any of that." Then learn. The same way I learned how to take care of 3 kids when I was barely older than Liam and Lily are now. The same way I learned to fill out college applications while working essentially full-time as a nanny. The The same way I learned to build a life for myself without any support from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. After I hung up, I sat in my dorm room for quite some time. My roommate was at his girlfriend's apartment, so I had some alone time to contemplate what had just happened. Part of me wanted to buy a plane ticket home. The part of me that had been trained since childhood to solve everyone else's issues and to put my own wants aside for the sake of the family. But a greater part of me, the one that had grown stronger over the previous 3 years, realized that returning would solve nothing and cost me everything. I called Dr. Carter instead. "Kevin," she replied, her voice filled with anxiety as I told her about Rachel's call. "How are you feeling?" "Guilty and angry and relieved. I think relieved that I'm not there, that it's not my problem to solve this time." "That's growth," she joked. "Recognizing that you can care about people without being responsible for their problems." The calls persisted for several months, first from Rachel, then Mom, and then from Dad. Always the same subject. Things were challenging, they needed aid. Couldn't I just come back for a short while? The guilt was unbearable at times. I'd lie awake at night worrying if Noah was doing well in school, if the twins were getting help with their homework, and if Rachel was taking care of herself while pregnant. But I remained firm about my boundaries. Rachel gave birth to a baby girl named Grace in December. Mom texted me a single snapshot. "She's gorgeous. We are all doing nicely." When I glanced at the image of my niece, a tiny red-faced infant with dark hair, I felt a complex range of emotions. Love since she was family, and completely innocent in all of this. I was sad since I missed her first moments, relief that her existence was not my responsibility. I said simply, "Congratulations, she's gorgeous." That was the only direct connection I had with my family in nearly 2 years. My bachelor's degree in psychology was completed successfully. I got accepted to the University of Washington's PhD program in developmental psychology, with an emphasis on family systems and child welfare. I moved to Seattle, rented a little apartment, and began researching. My research examined the long-term impacts of parentification on child development. I interviewed scores of young adults who had been forced to take on parental obligations as children, documenting the effects on their academic performance, mental health, and relationships. It was personal work disguised as academic research, and it was the most important thing I had ever done. Through my investigation, I met other people who had similar experiences. I was not alone. I was not crazy. I was not selfish. I was part of a more prevalent pattern than most people understood, and I was working to document it and find ways to heal from it. My phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon, 5 years after I left for Portland and 6 months after defending my dissertation. Another unknown number, this time from my home area code. I responded without thinking. "Kevin." "Oh, thank God. It's Dad." I hadn't heard my father's voice for years. He sounded elderly and exhausted. "Hi, Dad. Kevin, we need to talk. Are you free?" I was in the middle of evaluating data from a research on trauma-informed childcare practices, but something in his tone made me stop. "I can talk for a few minutes. What's going on?" "It's your mother. She had a stroke last month. She's not doing well, Kevin. She's in a rehabilitation facility, but the costs, and someone needs to coordinate her care. And Rachel's overwhelmed with the baby. And Noah's having problems at school." He was rambling, the words spilling out as if he had been holding them back for weeks. "Dad, slow down. How bad was the stroke?" "She lost some mobility on her left side. Her speech is affected. She's going to need ongoing therapy and probably long-term care assistance." "I'm sorry. That must be really difficult." There was a pause. "Kevin, I know we haven't talked in a long time. I know things ended badly between us, but we need help. Rachel can't manage everything, and I'm working 2 jobs just to keep up with the medical bills. The twins are in middle school now, and Noah's struggling." "And what are you asking me, Dad? Could you come home just for a while? Just to help us figure out what to do?" The old familiar request. The old familiar idea that my life was malleable, that my priorities were secondary, and that my value to the family was as a solver of problems I hadn't caused. This time, though, things were different. This time, I had 5 years of distance, a PhD, a career, and most crucially, a strong understanding of my identity, outside of my family position. "Dad, I'm sorry about Mom. I really am, and I'm sorry you're all struggling, but I can't come back. Kevin, please. I know we made mistakes. You disowned me. Mom told me I was selfish for accepting a full scholarship to college. None of you spoke to me for 5 years. You don't get to call me now and ask me to fix problems that were building long before Mom's stroke. That's not. We didn't disown you. We were hurt that you left. You were hurt that I stopped being your free child care. Silence. Dad, I love you. I love Mom. I love all my siblings. But loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your life for them. Especially when they've made it clear that your life doesn't matter to them. Your life does matter to us. Then why didn't it matter 5 years ago? Why didn't anyone care that I was missing out on normal teenage experiences to be a full-time babysitter? Why didn't anyone care that I was passing up local colleges to get an opportunity that could change my entire future? Why didn't anyone support me when I finally tried to build something for myself? We were scared. We didn't know how we'd manage without you. It was the first time anyone in my family had been honest with me in years. Dad, that was your problem to solve, not mine. I was a kid. Kids shouldn't have to manage their parents' inability to handle their responsibilities. We know that now, Rachel told us. She told us how hard it was. She couldn't do it even for a few months. She said she doesn't know how you managed for years. I felt a flash of affirmation, followed by grief. It took my family 5 years and a crisis to realize what I had been attempting to tell them all along. I'm glad Rachel understands now. But Dad, I can't fix this. I have a life here. I have a career, research commitments, responsibilities of my own. I can't just drop everything and come back to being the family problem solver. What are we supposed to do? What millions of families do when they face medical crisis? You research resources, you contact social services, you look into respite care and home health aides. You figure out sustainable solutions that don't depend on one person sacrificing their life. We don't know how to do that. Then you learn. The same way I learned to take care of kids when I was 17. The same way I learned to navigate college applications and scholarships and building a career without any support from my family. After I hung up, I sat in my hospital office for quite some time. Through the glass, I could see parents bringing their children to appointments, worried, optimistic, and fatigued expressions. They were all trying to do their best for their children given the situation. I reflected on my research, on all of the families I'd studied who had discovered ways to heal from dysfunctional patterns and establish healthier dynamics. It was conceivable, but everyone involved had to be willing to adapt, to abandon old roles and adopt new ways of communicating. My phone vibrated with a text from Rachel. Dad said you wouldn't come home. I understand why, but could we please talk? I glanced at the message for a moment before typing back. I'm willing to chat, but not about my return home. If you wish to talk about resources for Mom's care or child care choices, I can help you research them. Her reaction arrived immediately. That might be helpful. I am drowning, Kevin. I never recognized how much you accomplished. Over the next 3 weeks, Rachel and I had several lengthy phone chats, not about my return, but about real solutions to the family's issues. I assisted her in researching state services for families dealing with medical crises. I discovered information about sliding scale childcare, after-school programs, and respite care options. I even connected them with social professionals who specialize in assisting families with challenging care circumstances. My family gradually developed a sustainable system. Mom transferred from the rehabilitation facility to a smaller care facility closer to her house. Dad cut his hours at one of his jobs to help manage her care and spend more time with the younger children. Rachel got a part-time job with flexible hours and enrolled Grace in a daycare that charged sliding scale rates. It was not simple for them, and it wasn't ideal, but it was effective. Most significantly, it did not require me to sacrifice my life. 6 months after Dad's call, Mom was able to return home with the help of a part-time assistant. Her speech had greatly improved, and while she still had movement issues, she was stable. Noah was doing better in school after receiving tutoring and more constant home support. The twins had adapted to their new routines. Rachel contacted me one Saturday evening in spring. "How's everyone doing?" I inquired. "Better," she replied. "Really better. Mom's getting stronger every week. Noah made honor roll this semester. Liam and Lily are both playing soccer now." "That's wonderful. Kevin, I owe you an apology, a real one. I waited. When you left for college, I was jealous. I was jealous that you got this amazing opportunity and I was stuck at home dealing with my failures. And I was terrified because I knew that once you were gone, I'd have to step up, and I didn't think I could do it." "Rachel, no. Let me finish. I called you selfish because it was easier than admitting that I was the selfish one. I had been letting you carry all the responsibility while I got to be the irresponsible older sister. When you left, I realized how much work you'd been doing, how much you'd been sacrificing." She paused, and I heard her trembling breath. "I tried to take over for a few months when I got pregnant, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle what you'd been handling since you were 15 years old. And instead of recognizing that you were amazing, I was resentful that you weren't there to keep doing it." "Thank you for saying that," I replied softly. "I'm proud of you. I know I should have said that years ago, but I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself and for building something incredible with your life. And I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." We spoke for another hour. We talked for the first time in our adult lives. She told me about her problems with single parenthood, her concerns about being a decent parent, and her gratitude for everything I taught her during our upbringing that she had never acknowledged before. I informed her about my research, my professional objectives, and my life in Seattle. As we were winding up the call, she stated, "Would it be okay if I visited sometime? I'd love to see your life there, and I'd love for Grace to know her uncle." "I'd like that," I responded, really. A few weeks later, I received a card in the mail. Noah, now 12, wrote it in careful cursive handwriting, reminding me of when he was 5 years old and I helped him with his letters. "Dear Kevin, Dad told me you helped find the programs that allowed Mom to return home. Thank you for your assistance. Even though we were harsh to you. I miss you and hope to see you soon. I still own the elephant you mended. Love. Noah." Love for the little child who hugged me farewell in dinosaur pajamas. Grief over the years we had lost. Relief that we might be able to create something new. I do have relationships with my family members now, but they are based on choice and mutual respect, not obligation and guilt. Rachel comes to see me once a year with Grace, a bright, enthusiastic 5-year-old who refers to me as Uncle Kevin and enjoys visiting the Science Museum. Noah and I text frequently, and I've been able to assist him with college applications and scholarship essays. The twins are now adolescents, busy with sports and school activities, but they keep me updated on their life. Mom and I have video calls every few weeks. Her speech has almost fully restored. And although we've never had a lengthy chat about the past, she tells me she's pleased of what I've accomplished. Dad and I share emails regarding family news and my employment. It is not the close-knit familial relationship that other people have, but it is authentic. It is based on recognizing who we all truly are, rather than who circumstance and dysfunction have forced us to be.